Colophon. In the colophon of the Gita, the three expressions Brahma Vidyan, Yoga Sastra and Sri Krishnarjanasam Ved have been used in the singular number, but Srimad Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads, these two expressions have been used in the plural number. It means that in all the Upanishads, Srimad Bhagavad Gita is also an Upanishad in which Brahma Vidya, the discipline of knowledge, Yoga Sastra, the discipline of action, and Sri Krishnarjana Samvada, the discipline of devotion, the three have been included. In the Gita, Sri Krishnarjana Samvada viz. The dialogue between Lord Krishna and Arjuna begins with devotion and ends in devotion. In the beginning, Arjuna, being confused with regard to his duty, takes refuge in God, Gita 217, and in the end, being inspired by the Lord for taking refuge in him alone, by the expression Mamkam Saranam Vraja, Arjuna takes refuge in him alone, when he declares Kairisi Vakanam Tava, I will do your bidding. Arjuna asked Lord Krishna the means by which he might attain the highest good, Gita 217, 3-2, 511. Therefore the Lord has also described Jnanaga, the discipline of knowledge, and Karmaga, the discipline of action, in the Gita. Age-long caste traditions and family customs of the destroyers of the family get eradicated because of the intermixture created by the bad deeds of these destroyers of clans. 43. Comment. With the destruction of a race in war, family traditions are ruined. With the ruin of family traditions, impiety takes hold. With the growth of impiety, the women become depraved. With the vices there ensues an intermixture of castes. With the intermixture of castes, caste traditions of the clan destroyers are ruined. What are Kula Dharma and Jati Dharma? In every caste, a family has its own traditions, customs and decorum which are known as Kula Dharma, whereas the traditions of a caste as a whole are known as Jati Dharma or Varna Dharma. These traditions are general and these are approved by the scriptures. These traditions get ruined, if not followed. We have heard, Zero Janardana, that men, who have lost their family traditions, dwell in hell, for an indefinite period of time. 44. Comment. God has endowed man, with discretion and the right to perform, new deeds. Hence, he is free to perform good or bad actions. He should use discretion in performing actions. But he, being captive of greed, of pleasure etc., does not use his discretion and acts against the ordinance of scriptures, and family traditions. Consequently, he is criticized, insulted and looked down upon, in this life and suffers tortures of hell for a long time, in the life to come. This is what we have heard from our elders and ancestors. In the word Manusianim, the clan destroyers and all other members of the race, including ancestors of the race destroyers viz., Manis and their descendants, have been included. Link. In the verse that follows, we are told how Arjuna was influenced by the description of disastrous consequences of fighting a battle. Alas, goaded by the lust for throne and enjoyment, we seem bent on perpetrating the great sin of killing our kinsmen. 45. Comment. Duryodhana and his companions are villains. Being goaded by greed, they are not guided by righteousness, and so they are prepared to wage a war. We have the power to discriminate between righteousness and unrighteousness, virtue and vice, but we are also prepared to wage war to kill our own kinsmen, just like ignorant people. So it is something very surprising and shocking. By doing so, we are going to commit a great sin, by turning a deaf ear to the teachings of preceptors and scriptures. The word aho expresses surprise. It is surprising that we have decided to commit sin by waging this war, even having known its horrifying consequences. The word bhata expresses sorrow. It is a matter of sorrow that we are prepared to slay our kith and kin, being overpowered by greed, for a transient kingdom and pleasure. Greed for kingdom and pleasure is the only cause for perpetrating the great sin of killing our kinsmen. It means that if we get victory in the battle, we shall get kingdom, wealth, honor, glory, power, pleasure and luxuries. Such greed for kingdom and enjoyment is totally unjustified for such people as us. In this verse, Arjuna wants to say that a man can carry out the behest of scriptures and teachers etc., only by honoring his own good ideas, and his own knowledge. But he who dishonors them, cannot adopt virtuous principles of scriptures and teachers. Thus good thoughts and ideas do not arise up in him. Then, who can check him from possessing evil thoughts and performing evil actions? Similarly, if we disregard our knowledge, who can check us from committing the great sin of killing our kinsmen? Here, Arjuna is thinking about the disastrous consequences of war, and so he is not willing to wage it. But he is not thinking that his feelings of attachment, selfishness and delusion for the family are responsible for his behavior, which is totally wrong for a thoughtful, righteous and brave member of the warrior class. Arjuna in the 38th verse states that Duryodhana etc., with mind blinded by greed, do not perceive the evil of destruction of their own clan and the sin accruing from enmity towards friends. Here, he says that goaded by the greed for throne and enjoyment, they themselves are prepared to commit a great sin. It proves that Arjuna knows that greed is the cause of sins. But, in the 36th verse of the 3rd chapter, he asks, impelled by what does a man commit sin, unwillingly, and why? The answer is, that he has a feeling of attachment and affection for the family, so he wants to come away from war. He thinks that greed is the root cause of the sin of destruction of one's own clan. But, by hearing the gospel of the Gita, he wants to know the path or discipline by pursuing which he may obtain the highest good, the supreme bliss. Gita 312. So, in the 3rd chapter he asks, which is the force that impels a man to abandon his duty, viz. In 336, Arjuna asks the question as a striver about his duty, not as a person having attachment for his family. Link engrossed in surprise and sorrow, Arjuna in the verse that follows relates his decision, arrived at after these arguments. It would, indeed, be better for me if the sons of Dhritarashtra armed with weapons killed me in battle with me, while I will be unarmed and unresisting. 46 Comment Arjuna says, if I turn away from the war, perhaps our opponents will also desist from it. Why will they fight, if we are determined not to fight? But even if, regarding us as their enemy, they zealously, armed with weapons kill me, that will indeed be in my own interest, as it will be a kind of repentance for the determination, which I had made, in the war to kill my preceptors, and I shall be purified of the sins. It means that if I do not wage war, I will escape sip and my race will not be destroyed. When a man talks about a subject, it has its effect on him also. When Arjuna, possessed by extreme passion, started to speak in sadness, in the 28th verse, he was not so much overwhelmed with grief as he was now. Then, Arjuna did not turn away from war, but went on speaking, overwhelmed with grief. But at last, he turns away from war, and sits down having laid down his bow and arrow. Lord Krishna did not speak, to enable Arjuna to give an outlet for his feelings of sadness completely, because he knew that his teachings would be of some avail to him, only when there was an outlet for his sorrow. An important fact: worldly people will support the argument seduced by Arjuna, but they will not agree with Lord Krishna, who will justify war later. The reason is, that as Arjuna is full of attachment and love, the worldly people also belong to the same class. So they cannot understand the point of view expressed by Lord Krishna, who always thinks about the welfare and benediction of beings. They will say that Arjuna wanted to escape the sin by not waging war, but it was Lord Krishna who inspired him to wage war. So, it was not proper on his part to do so. The fact is that Lord Krishna did not make Arjuna wage war. He reminded him of his duty only. It was Arjuna who had invited Lord Krishna to the war front, but seeing his kinsmen on the hostile side, he was turning away from his duty. So Lord Krishna reminded him not to neglect his duty, out of delusion, but to wage war, because there was nothing more welcome to a member of the warrior class than a righteous war. For example, if a man is going to Badranrayana, but by mistake he starts going in the opposite direction, he then happens to meet a person who asks him where he was going. The latter tells him that he has taken the wrong direction, so he should turn back in order to reach his destination. Here, the person shows the right direction, way, to the man who had lost it. Similarly, Lord Krishna showed Arjuna the right direction of his duty. After seeing his kinsmen arrayed on the war front, Arjuna said to Lord Krishna, I will not fight. 2:9. But after hearing the gospel of Lord Krishna, he did not say I'll not fight, but he said, I will carry out your bidding. 1873, viz., twill do my duty. It shows that Lord Krishna reminded him of his duty. The fact is that war was inevitable because Lord Krishna himself, while revealing his supreme divine form to Arjuna, said, I am the mighty world-destroying time, the destroyer of the world. My purpose here is to destroy these people. Even if you do not kill them, all those warriors arrayed in the enemy's camp, will not survive. 1132. Thus this destruction of human beings was inevitable, even if Arjuna did not fight. If Arjuna did not fight, Yudhisthira, who with his 4 brothers married Draupadi by obeying his mother, would certainly fight by obeying her. Similarly, Bhima would never deviate from the war because he had already taken a pledge to kill the Kauravas. As far as Draupadi is concerned, she had even said that if her husbands, the Pandavas, did not fight, her father, Drupada, her brother, Drishtadyumna, her 5 sons and Abhimanyu, would fight against the Kauravas. All these facts show that the war was inevitable. A man cannot control the happenings that are predestined. By discharging his duty one can attain salvation, but by neglecting it, he can degrade himself. It means that man is free to attain either desirable or undesirable results. Therefore, Lord Krishna, by reminding Arjuna of his duty, has preached to human beings that they should always discharge their duty by following the ordinance of scriptures and never turn away from these. Mahabharata, Adhyaga 82,137-38. Link in the preceding verse. Arjuna expressed his intention based on many arguments. What he did after this is contained in the verse that follows. Arjuna, grief-stricken on the battlefield, having spoken thus, and having laid down his bow and arrow, slumped into the central part of the chariot. 47. Comment. War is the root cause of all evils. It will destroy a race and will lead us to hell in the next world. By thinking so, Arjuna, overwhelmed with sorrow, became firmly determined not to wage war. Arjuna, who had come to the battlefield with great zeal with Gandiva bow in his hand, put the bow and arrow down, and overwhelmed with sorrow, sat on the seat of the chariot. The main reason of Arjuna's grief is that when Lord Krishna placed the chariot between the 2 armies and asked Arjuna to behold the Kauravas, he saw Bhisma and Drona standing in front of him. So his attachment was aroused. Thus, he thought about the destruction of his race, which Duryodhana etc. did not perceive, being goaded by greed, and the sin accruing from it. Then he said that, even if the warriors of the hostile army killed him, while he was unarmed and unresisting, that would be for his good. Thus empowered by delusion, Arjuna perceives good in turning away from war, and even in his death, and finally having abandoned his bow and arrow and overwhelmed with grief, sits on the middle seat of the chariot. Thus, we see that it is delusion which changes the hero's, Arjuna's, great courage to consternation. Thus with the words, Om, Tat, Sat, the names of the Lord as sung in the Upanishad of the Bhagavad Gita by the Lord, the science of Brahma, the scripture on yoga, the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna, ends the first chapter entitled, The Yoga of Dejection of Arjuna. The colophon at the end of each chapter, written by sage Vedavyasa, reveals the glory and greatness of the Gita. Om, Tat, Sat. This has been declared as the triple designation of the Absolute. These 3 names lead the beings to benediction and turn us towards God and spirituality and break off our relationship with the world. These wash away the mistakes which we might have committed in pronouncing the verses, words and letters, in the chapter. So these 3 are pronounced at the end of each chapter. By Om, sage Vedavyasa means that this may wash away the mistakes of the verses, Tat may turn his verses towards God, and Sat means that these verses may give an imperishable fruit. Iti Kama means that he has no other personal motive besides this one. The Gita has been called Srimad because it possesses paramount beauty, and it is called Srimad Bhagavad because Vedic Gita 17:23-27 it has been uttered by Lord Krishna, who possesses 6 bhagas, i.e., divine traits, wealth, virtue, glory, greatness, knowledge and dispassion. It has been called the Gita because it has been sung by the Lord himself. According to the rules of Sanskrit grammar, it should have been called Gaitam, yet it being the essence of Upanishads, in feminine gender, it has been called the Gita. The essence of all Upanishads is contained in it, and it has emanated from the tongue of the Lord himself, so it is called Upanishad. It is called Brahmavidya, supreme knowledge, because it leads the living being to benediction without any distinction of caste, creed and color. It is called Yoga Sastra because different yogas, disciplines, such as Karmaga, the discipline of disinterested action, Jnanaga, the discipline of knowledge, Dhyanaga, the discipline of meditation, and Bhakti Yoga, the discipline of devotion, are contained in it. By following any one of these disciplines, a striver can realize his identity with God, Paramatma. It is a dialogue between Lord Krishna and the devotee Arjuna. Arjuna has asked questions without hesitation, and Lord Krishna has answered them with generosity. So it is called a dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna. In the first chapter, there is description of Arjuna's dejection. By the company of God and saints, this dejection may create dispassion and thus may lead to benediction. Though Duryodhana also possessed dejection, yet having disinclination for God, his dejection is not called yoga. But it is called yoga, in the case of Arjuna, as he could realize his identity with God by means of this yoga. So this chapter is entitled The Yoga of Dejection of Arjuna. The purpose of the concluding words, which are given at the end of each chapter, is that even a single chapter well meditated upon may lead a striver to benediction. Words, letters and the avaka, said, in the first chapter. 1. In this chapter in Athapradhamadya there are 3 words, in Dhritarashtravyaka and Safaja avaka etc. there are 12 words. In verses, there are 558 words and there are 13 concluding words. Thus the total number of words is 586. 2. In this chapter in Athapradhamadya there are 7 letters, in Dhritarashtra avaka, Sanjaya avaka etc. there are 37 letters, in verses there are 1,504 letters and the concluding letters are 48. In this way the total number of letters in this chapter is 1,596. Each verse, in this chapter consists of 32 letters. 3. In this chapter avaka, said, has been used 6 times, Dhritarashtra avaka once, Sanjaya avaka thrice and Arjuna avaka twice. Meters used in the first chapter out of the 47 verses of this chapter, in the first quarter of the 5th verse, as well as the 33rd verse, and in the 3rd quarter of the 43rd verse Ragana being used there is Ravipula meter, while in the 1st quarter of the 25th verse and the 3rd quarter of the 9th verse Nagana being used, there is Navipula meter. The remaining 42 verses have the characteristics of right Pathya Vectra Anusdup meter. 2 Sri Hari 2 Iskan Chapter 1 Introduction. Duryodhana mentioned the great warriors of the 2 armies, but Dronacharya did not utter a word. So Duryodhana became sad. Then, Bhisma blew his conch loudly to cheer Duryodhana. Hearing the sound of his conch, the conchs, drums and cow horns etc., of the Kaurava and the Pandava armies blared forth. After this, from the 20th verse, the dialogue between Lord Krishna and Arjuna began. Arjuna asked Lord Krishna to place his chariot in the midst of the 2 armies. The Lord, having placed the chariot between the 2 armies, in front of Bhisma and Drona etc., asked Arjuna to behold the Kuras. Having seen his kinsman, he was filled with compassion and sadness, that he cast away his bow and arrows, and slumped into the seat of the chariot. The second chapter starts with Sanjaya telling Dhritarashtra what Lord Krishna had said to Arjuna, when he was overwhelmed with grief. Sanjaya said, Madhusudana, he who destroyed the demon named Madhu, addressed the following words to Arjuna, who was overwhelmed with compassion and in deep distress and whose eyes were flooded with tears of despondence. 1 comment. Arjuna advises Lord Krishna to place his chariot in between the 2 armies, so that he may behold the war-minded warriors who dared to risk their lives, by fighting against such a valiant warrior, as he. But the same heroic and zealous Arjuna, at the sight of his kinsman, becomes overwhelmed with grief, his limbs give way, his mouth is parched, his body shivers, his hairs stand on end, his bow slips from his hand, his skin burns all over and his mind reels. His bravery comes into faint-heartedness and he slips into the seat of the chariot. Sanjaya conveys the same feelings of Arjuna, who was drowned in distress and despondency. Such a valiant warrior, Arjuna was full of familial attachment and his eyes were full of tears, that he could not even see clearly. Lord Krishna, Madhusudana, said the following words, the words which will be repeated in the 2nd and 3rd verses, to Arjuna, who was overwhelmed with grief because of his loss of courage. Here, visitantum uvaka was enough, because the word vacuum is also included in the verb avaka. But the word vacuum has a special meaning. These words of Lord Krishna are very profound and uncommon. These attack Arjuna's faint-heartedness and despondency, which overpowered Arjuna, in the discharge of his duty. They make him aware of his weakness and arouse in him a desire for benediction. It is because of these profound words of Lord Krishna that Arjuna, by becoming his disciple and seeks refuge in him. 217. Safaja, by using the word Madhusudana, means to say that Lord Krishna is the killer of demon. Madhu, i.e., he is the destroyer of people having a villainous nature, and so he will certainly destroy wicked-natured Duryodhana and his group. Link. The next two verses contain what Lord Krishna told Arjuna. The blessed Lord said, Arjuna, how has this affliction overtaken you at this odd hour? It is shunned by noble souls, neither could it bring heaven nor fame to you. 2. Comment. Arjuna. Lord Krishna addressed him as Arjuna, which means pure in heart. The Lord means to say how he has become faint-hearted, when it is quite unbecoming of him. Lord Krishna, being surprised, asks Arjuna why he has developed faint-heartedness instead of valor and zeal. At this juncture, a man is surprised in two ways: out of his own ignorance, and as a warning to others. Lord Krishna's surprise here is a warning to Arjuna, so that he may be aware of his duty. Kuta means that this faint-heartedness is not permanent in him. It is only a temporary phase, which will go away. Samupastita means you are faint-hearted, not only in words and feelings, but also in actions. You are overcome by this faint-heartedness, and therefore you sat in the middle of the chariot, after abandoning your bow and arrows. The Lord is called Bhagavan because he possesses 6 bhagas, divine traits. They are wealth, virtue, glory, greatness, knowledge and dispassion. Great people do not become faint-hearted. They shun the feeling because it does not lead them to any good. Great men who want to achieve success do so with fixed objectives, during activity as well as non-activity. They do not shirk their duty. According to prevailing circumstances, they perform their duty thoroughly, with zeal and readiness, in order to achieve emancipation. So, it is not proper on his part to refrain from the duty of fighting, because of cowardice. If we leave aside the goal of success and consider the matter from the worldly point of view, the attainment of heaven is the highest achievement. With this timidity you cannot even attain the heaven. Even without having the aim of attainment of heaven, a noble person performs those deeds which bring him name and fame in the world. But this cowardice would defame you. So it does not befit you at all to be faint-hearted. Here, the Lord, begiving these 3 expressions and readjustum, Asvarjayam and Akayardakram, in a sequence has explained that there are 3 types of persons: I, thoughtful, whose aim is to attain benediction; 2, virtuous, who by doing virtuous actions want to attain heaven; 3, and ordinary, who want name and fame in the world. So, by giving the above-mentioned 3 kind, Lord Krishna wants to warn Arjuna that his affliction would bring him neither benediction, nor heaven nor fame, but would degrade and defame him, and lead him to hell. Link. In the verse that follows, Lord Krishna points out what to do when a person is in the grip of cowardice. O Partha, son of Prithvi's, Kunti, yield not to cowardice. It does not befit you. Cast off this petty faint-heartedness and wake up, O vanquisher of foes. 3. Comment. Partha. Lord Krishna addresses Arjuna as Partha, to remind him of Mother Kunti's message and arouse in him feelings of bravery which befits the members of a warrior class. It means that he should not disobey his mother by showing cowardice. It is because of faint-heartedness that Arjuna perceives it righteous not to wage war and unrighteous to wage war. Therefore, to warn him, Lord Krishna says that it is impotence rather than righteousness not to wage war. So he should abandon this weakness. You should not have developed this timidity in you, because you are the son of a brave mother of warrior class, and you yourself are also brave. Therefore, this weakness does not befit you at all. Parantapa. You are the scorcher and vanquisher of foes. So, will you gladden your enemies by showing your disinclination for war? Here, Gzajrim has 2 meanings. This faint-heartedness will make you lowly, viz., it will deprive you of salvation, heaven or fame. And if you, being the son of Partha, Arjuna is called Partha. This word manifests intimacy between Lord Krishna and Arjuna. In the Gita, Lord Krishna has used this address 38 times, more than any other address. The second place goes to Kandya, which has been used 24 times. When Lord Krishna wants to say something special or give assurance to Arjuna, or there is an overflow of love for him, he calls him Partha. By addressing him thus, he wants to remind him that besides being the son of his father's sister, he is his loving devotee and friend. Gita 4:3. Therefore he tells him something very secret and true for his welfare. Kundi's message to Arjuna and to Bhima, who were ever eager to fight: it is the time for Wik, the mother of the warrior class, gives birth to her sons. Do not abandon it, you will become insignificant. This faint-heartedness is petty. So it is not difficult for a brave person like you to abandon. You are thinking that being virtuous, you do not want to commit a sin by waging war, but it is your cowardice. So by abandoning it, you should discharge your duty, by arraying yourself to wage war. Lord Krishna knows for certain that it is Arjuna's first and foremost duty to wage war. So, he, without caring for Arjuna's lame excuses, orders him quickly to wage war, with full preparations. Appendix: this fact has been described in detail by the Lord ahead from the 31st verse to the 38th verse of this chapters. Links: in the first chapter, Arjuna gave several arguments against the war, but without attaching importance to his arguments, Lord Krishna suddenly scolded Arjuna for his faint-heartedness, and ordered him to array himself to wage war. So Arjuna, without getting any satisfactory reply to his arguments, got excited and spoke abruptly. Arjuna said, "O slayer of Madhu, and slayer of foes, how shall I fight Bhisma and Drona, with arrows, on the battlefield? Both of them are worthy of our worship." For comment: Arjuna addresses the Lord as Madhusudana and Risudana, because he had killed unrighteous, villainous and cruel demons, such as Madhu etc., and foes also who always are jealous of others, without rhyme or reason. But how can he kill his great well-wisher, the respected grandfather Bhisma, and adorable preceptor Drona, who have great affection for him? I am not turning away from war because of faint-heartedness, but because it is unrighteous for me to fight with the revered grandsire Bhisma and venerable teacher Drona. I would be called unmanly if I were afraid of death. I am not afraid of dying, but I do not want to kill my venerable elders, who have always been very affectionate to me. Grandfather Bhisma has loved me since my childhood. When I addressed him as father, he very affectionately used to say that he was my father's father. Similarly, my adorable preceptor Drona has been so kind to me that he imparted to me better training than he imparted even to his son. He taught the use of Brahma weapon, a kind of weapon which caused infallible destruction and set in motion by incantation, to both of us, but as far as its control or end is concerned, he taught that only to me, not to his son. He also granted me a boon that no one would excel me in military science. So it is a mortal sin to wage war against them. Both Bhisma and Drona, being elderly, are venerable and adorable. They have a right to attack me, but it is a deadly sin for me to fight against them with my arrows. Link: in the preceding verse, Arjuna, being excited, revealed his decision to Lord Krishna. Now, being influenced by Lord Krishna's words and balancing his decision with that of Lord Krishna, he says, "Better to live on alms in this world than to slay these noble elders, because after killing them we could enjoy only blood-stained pleasure, in the form of wealth and sense objects." 5 Comment: it seems after reading this verse, that the words of Lord Krishna, uttered in the 2nd and 3rd verses, had some effect on Arjuna. He is thinking that though Lord Krishna knows that it is not justified for him to kill his venerable elders, yet he is unable to understand why he is ordering him to wage war. So Arjuna does not speak with excitement, but speaks, somewhat politely. Arjuna first presents his point of view, saying that if he did not fight with Reverend Bhisma and Drona etc., Duryodhana by himself would not fight with him either. Thus he would lose his kingdom and suffer. Then he would be leading a life of misery and could even depend on alms. But he thinks it better to live on alms than to slay his relevant elders. Ayalok means if I live on alms, people in the world will dishonor, reproach and insult me, but I think accepting alms is better than killing my reverend preceptors. API, even, means for me slaying the noble preceptors and living on alms both are forbidden. But, I think it is more sinful to kill the preceptors than to live on alms. If I carry out your command to wage war, I would enjoy blood-stained pleasure, which will not give me peace and salvation. Here, a question might arise, that Bhisma and Drona etc., preceptors were attached to Kauravas, because of pecuniary motives. Therefore, what is the objection if Arthakaman is taken as an adjective qualifying Gurian? The answer is, that it is not proper, because they had no desire for money. It was incumbent upon them to fight on Duryodhana's side, because they had eaten his salt. Secondly, Arjuna has used the term Manubhavan, most noble. So, how can the most noble souls desire money? Those who desire money could not be most noble. Therefore, here Arthakaman is the adjective which qualifies Bhagan. An exceptional fact Lord Krishna, in the second and the third verses, orders Arjuna to array himself by casting off petty faint-heartedness and fight. But Arjuna gets him wrong, because he thinks that Lord Krishna had ordered him to wage war, so that he might enjoy the pleasure of kingship. Arjuna however perceived only evil in waging the war. He said that it would be better for him if his opponents killed him in the war. So with his mind affected by grief he sat slumped on the seat of the chariot. 147. He had also said that Duryodhana and his companions, being goaded by greed, were prepared to wage war. Now Arjuna says for himself that if he, the worldly people having a materialistic outlook, cannot even think of spiritualism. Here Arjuna, also being overtaken by family attachment and infatuation, is thinking only of materialism rather than spiritualism. So he's thinking that Lord Krishna wants him to wage war so that he might obtain kingdom. But Lord Krishna wants him to attain salvation. Carries out his order and wages war, he will enjoy only blood-stained pleasure in the form of wealth and sensual enjoyment. Thus, he perceives nothing but evil in waging war. When an evil comes to us in the form of an evil, it is easier to do away with it than when it comes in the garb of something good. Ravana and Devakalani could not be recognized by Sluta and Hanuman respectively, because both of them disguise themselves as sages. Similarly, Arjuna perceives that it is virtuous not to wage war and it is an evil to wage the war, but he is completely mistaken. Hence, even Lord Krishna finds it difficult and time-consuming to bring Arjuna round to the realization of this fact. Today, in the name of unity in society, people are determined to abolish caste, stage of life system, varnasrama, thinking of their action as virtuous, but they are not thinking about the disastrous consequences that this abolition would force the people to lead a degraded and demoniacal life. In the same way, in the accumulation of wealth, people do not perceive falsehood, fraud, dishonesty, knavery and treachery etc. as evils. Thus, here for Arjuna also, an evil of unmanliness has disguised itself as righteousness, and thus he says how he can slay his noble elders. It means that whatever Arjuna considers a virtue is in fact an evil. But it does not appear to him to be an evil, as in the abandonment of his duty has crept in the guise of virtue of non-violence, because of his attachment for his relatives. Appendix: the feelings of elders and preceptors such as Bhisma and Drona etc. are noble and pure because even while waging the war, they have no partiality. Link: the holy words of God had a singular effect and exerted a deep and far-reaching influence on Arjuna, as a result of which he starts doubting the correctness of his decision not to wage war. In such a state of mind, Arjuna says, "We don't know which is meritorious for us, to fight or not to fight, nor do we know whether we shall win or they will conquer us. The sons of Dhritarashtra, by killing whom we do not even wish to live, are arrayed against us." 6. Comment: I cannot decide whether I should wage war or not, because you consider it better to wage war, but I do not do so, as it is a sin to kill noble elders and preceptors. If I carry out your order and wage war, we do not know whether we shall win or lose. Here, it does not mean that Arjuna has no confidence in his own power, but he is uncertain about the future, because no one knows what may happen in future. Not to speak of pleasures and kingdom, we do not even wish to live by killing our kinsmen, because by killing them we shall be bereaved of them and thus shall suffer pangs of bereavement. Dhritarashtra's sons are our kinsmen and they are arrayed against us. So, how can we kill them? We are damned if we wish to live by killing them. Link: finding himself at the crossroads, Arjuna, being restless, prays to Lord Krishna. My nature is overwhelmed with the vice of faint-heartedness and my mind is confused with regard to my duty. I entreat you, tell me what is decidedly good for me. I am your disciple. Do instruct me, who have taken refuge in you. 7. Comment: Arjuna did not think it desirable to turn away totally from the war, but to escape the sin. He did not find any other alternative. So he wanted to turn away from war, and he thought of such action as a virtue, rather than a vice of faint-heartedness. But, when Lord Krishna called his action faint-hearted and unmanly, Arjuna was reminded of his duty, as a member of the warrior class for whom it was not befitting to run. So Arjuna, by conceding his faint-heartedness, says that first his nature even as a member of the warrior class, was weighed down with the weakness of faint-heartedness, and secondly, his mind was confused with regard to his duty. Being overpowered by delusion, he could not take the right decision about its righteousness. In the third verse Lord Krishna advised Arjuna, cast off your petty faint-heartedness and stand up for war. So his doubt should have been removed. But he still had some doubt, because, on the one hand he thought that it was a sin to kill the kinsmen and the adorable elders, but on the other hand, being a member of the warrior class, it was his duty to wage war. So he was confused with regard to his duty, and he entreats Lord Krishna to tell him what his real duty is. In the second verse of this chapter, Lord Krishna told him that his dejection was a shame and it should be shunned by noble souls. So Arjuna thought that he should also follow the path adopted by noble souls. Therefore, he prays to Lord Krishna to tell him what is decidedly good for him. First Arjuna was agitated and distressed, and he asks what was good for him. It shows that an awakening for salvation as a goal is not aroused in a man, so long as he is satisfied with his present situation. But when he is dissatisfied and he wants to rise above it, he becomes aware of his real aim, i.e., salvation. When Arjuna entreated Lord Krishna to tell him what was decidedly good for him, he thought that such a question could be put to a teacher, not to a chariot driver. Arjuna's conviction that he was a Kriat warrior, while Krishna was his charioteer, whom he ordered to place the chariot between the two armies, had gone. So he becomes his disciple and declares, I am your disciple, so tell me what is decidedly good for me. Sadimantvam prapam. Arjuna thinks that the preceptor can guide the disciple, and the disciple will have to shoulder the responsibility to translate his teachings into practice, and then make effort to attain salvation. But he wants to hand over this responsibility to his preceptor, as the mother of a breast-sucking child, not the child who falls sick, takes medicine for his recovery. The teacher take over responsibility of the disciple, who takes refuge in him. So Arjuna, by depending on the teacher and surrendering to him, says, I have taken refuge in you, instruct me. Here, Arjuna, by using the phrase Tvarn Prapam, says that he has taken refuge in him. But actually he had not taken completely refuge in him. Had he done this, he would not have uttered the words instruct me, because a disciple has no responsibility of his own. The full responsibility lies with the teacher. Secondly, in the 9th verse he says, I shall not fight. It also shows that he had not really taken refuge in him. Otherwise he might have not uttered these words. A disciple who takes refuge in his teacher has no say, no responsibility of his own. He becomes merely an instrument in the hands of his preceptor and does whatever his teacher wants him to do. Therefore, Lord Krishna in the 66th verse of the 18th chapter says, Seek refuge in me, alone. 1866. Then Arjuna, in the 73rd verse of the 18th chapter says, I shall act according to your word. It is here that Arjuna really takes refuge in him. In this verse, there are 4 points spoken by Arjuna, which need attention. My nature is weighed down with the vice of faint-heartedness, and I entreat you because my mind is confused with regard to my duty. 2. Tell me, he entreats, what is decidedly good for me. 3. I am your disciple. 4. Instruct me who has taken refuge in you. If we think over these 4 points, one by one, we realize that as far as the first point is concerned, the person to whom the question is asked is free, whether he answers the question or not. The second point shows that it is his duty to answer. In the third, the responsibility to guide the disciple, so that he may attain salvation, is that of the teacher. In the fourth, the full responsibility for salvation of the disciple is the teacher's. Link in the previous verse, Arjuna takes refuge in Lord Krishna, but he thinks that Lord Krishna wants him to wage the war, which he regards as unrighteous, and so he will again order him to wage war. Secondly, he thinks that perhaps he has not been able to convey his feelings to him. So in the next verse, Arjuna clearly expresses his feelings to him against the war. Even on obtaining undisputed sovereignty and an affluent kingdom on this earth as well as lordship over the gods in heaven, I do not see any remedy that can remove my grief, which withers my senses. 8. Comment. Arjuna thinks Lord Krishna wants him to wage war, so that he may gain victory and kingdom, and thus his grief may be removed. But he is so grief-stricken, that even the joy of victory is not likely to remove his grief. Even if I obtain an undisputed sovereignty and affluent kingdom on this earth, and my subjects become happy and prosperous, and I may have no enemy on the face of earth, it will fail to remove my grief. Srinamapalkadapatiam, not to talk of worldly pleasure, even lordship of Indra, the king of the gods, over the gods, cannot remove my worry and grief. In verses 32 and 33 of the first chapter, Arjuna wanted to turn away from war, because of his attachment for his kinsman. But here, he wants to turn away from war because he thinks that it is an obstacle to salvation. So there is a lot of difference between the two situations. How sad I shall become, after the death of my kinsman, when I am so much grieved after thinking of it. If I grieved over the loss of a kingdom, it might be overcome by gaining it. But I am grieved at thinking of the massacre of my kinsman. If I gain a kingdom, it will rather enhance my grief, because who could enjoy the kingdom after the death of my kinsman? Therefore, undisputed sovereignty and an affluent kingdom on this earth and lordship over the gods cannot remove the grief that is parching my senses. Link what Arjuna did after saying that even possession of material objects would not relieve him of his grief is contained in the verse that follows. Sanjaya said, O scorcher of enemies, after addressing the indwelling Lord thus, Arjuna, the conqueror of sleep, said to him, I'll not fight, and became silent. 9. Arjuna honored the Lord's word and wanted to obey it. But after thinking seriously over what Lord Krishna had said and applying his own mind to his thoughts, came to the conclusion that war could result in providing him with an affluent kingdom, honor and fame. But it would not wipe out his grief, worry and misery. Therefore, it was not befitting for him to wage war. So Arjuna speaks his mind in clear words, I'll not fight. Having declared his decision not to fight, and having nothing more to say, Arjuna became quiet. Link in the next verse, Sanjaya describes what happened when Arjuna flatly refused to fight. O Bharata, Dhritarashtra, born in Bharata dynasty, Sri Krishna, as if smiling, addressed the following words to the despondent Arjuna while in the midst of the two armies. 10. Arjuna, filled with valor and enthusiasm, had entreated Lord Krishna to place his chariot between the two armies, so that he could behold the warriors. It was befitting for Arjuna to get ready for fighting, which was his objective. But there, instead of waging war, he felt grieved. So Lord Krishna started the Gospel of the Emi. Prahusaniva, smiling, as it were, means that when Lord Krishna perceived that Arjuna's enthusiasm for the war had changed into grief, he smiled. Secondly, in the 7th verse he said, Do instruct me who have taken refuge in you. But in the 9th verse he says, I shall not fight. So Lord Krishna smiled, because the devotee who takes refuge in his preceptor just becomes an instrument in the hands of his preceptor, and the preceptor is fully responsible for the duty of the disciple. The disciple has no option but to obey his preceptor and do as his teacher wishes. Arjuna's declaration not to fight is practically a withdrawal from his refuge in the Lord. Eva means that Lord Krishna must have burst into laughter after hearing Arjuna's decision of not fighting, but he spoke smilingly. When Arjuna said, I'll not fight, Lord Krishna should have told him to do as he wished. 1863. But he thought that Arjuna was unable to take the right decision, because he was overwhelmed with grief and worry. So, there was an overflow of Lord Krishna's love for him. God, instead of paying attention to the words of his devotees, judges them by their feelings. So Lord Krishna, instead of paying attention to Arjuna's words, I'll not fight, started the gospel from the next verse. Moreover, he accepts those devotees who take refuge in him, even by words as his own, because of his boundless grace. Sankisa means that the Lord is the indweller of his. He knows feelings of beings. Lord Krishna knows that Arjuna is turning away from war, because he is overpowered by the urge of attachment for his kinsman, and he does not see his grief melting away by merely acquiring a kingdom. So he says, I'll not fight. But he also knows that as soon as his delusion is destroyed, he will act upon his instruction. In Idarnvaka Avaka, the use of the word avaka, spoke, was sufficient. There was no need to use the word vaka, word, because vaka is also included in avaka. It seems a repetition, but actually it is not so. The word Vaka has been used to point out the secret wisdom contained in the next verse uttered by Lord Krishna, in simple and easily understandable language. Appendix: on the sacred, righteous, soil of Kurukshetra on one side the Kaurava army is arrayed, while on the other side the Pandava army is arrayed. In the middle of the two armies a glorious chariot drawn by white horses is placed. In one part of that chariot Lord Krishna is seated, while in another part Arjuna is seated. The Lord starts preaching the divine gospel for the benediction of mankind by making Arjuna an instrument, and first of all he describes the discrimination between the body and the embodied soul, its possessor. Lord Krishna preaches the gospel of freedom from grief to grieved Arjuna and says, the blessed Lord said, Arjuna, you grieve for those who should not be grieved at, yet speak as if a man of wisdom. The wise grieve, neither for the living, nor for the dead. 11. Comment: a man is grieved when he classifies objects and persons into two divisions, one's own, and not one's own, such as, our kinsman and not our kinsman, of our caste and not of our caste, of our stage of life and not of our stage of life, our followers and not our followers. We have a sense of mind, attachment, love and desire for those who we regard as ours. Through these a sense of mind and desire, etc., faults such as grief, worry, fear, perturbation, commotion and strain, etc., arise. The root of all faults is a sense of mind and desire, etc. This is a rule. At the beginning of the Gita, Dhritarashtra asked, what did my sons and the sons of Pandu do? It shows his partiality towards his own sons and attachment for them, though the Pandavas regarded him more than their father. Arjuna also developed the same attachment, but he had no partiality, he was impartial, and so he uses the terms seeing all these relations. 128. And how can we, by killing our own kinsmen, be happy? 137. It means that Arjuna had attachment for the Kuru family, and because of possibility of destruction of the family, he was grieved. To remove this grief, Lord Krishna preaches the gospel of the Gita, which begins with this 11th verse. In the end, Lord Krishna declares that there is no justification for him to grieve, and he should take refuge in him alone, and not grieve not. 1866. The reason is that dependence on the world leads to grief, while supreme or exclusive devotion to the Lord leads to the state which is free from faults such as grief and worry, etc. There are two things in the world, real and unreal, the soul and the body. Both of these are not to be grieved at, as the real is imperishable, and therefore should not be grieved for, and the unreal is bound to perish, as it is perishing every moment, so it should not be grieved at. It means that these are grieved at only because of ignorance or lack of discrimination. Whatever circumstances, in the form of birth, death, profit loss, etc., a man finds himself in, are result of his fate, viz., his previous actions. It is sheer ignorance to feel happy or sad in those favorable or unfavorable circumstances, because these are transient. Prajnavidam skubses. On the one hand, you speak words of wisdom, but on the other hand, you grieve. It shows that you are merely talking tall, actually you are not wise, because the wise do not grieve for anyone. You also say that with the destruction of a family, its age-old traditions disappear, women become depraved, and there ensues an intermixture of castes, which leads to hell, and deprived of the ritual offerings of rice balls, pinda, and water, their manes also fall. These words, as of the wise, also prove that a body is perishable, while the soul is imperishable. Had the soul not been imperishable, how could you have feared the fall of the killers and members of the family? Further, you would not have worried about the fall of manes. Your worry and fear prove that a body is perishable while its master, the soul, is eternal. So it is not right to grieve for them. It is out of ignorance that you grieve for the bodies, because these will all perish. You should not lament for them. Such grief is a mistake. It is also a great mistake to grieve for those who are dead because they suffer torture. If there are people, grieve for them. The departing soul has to drink and eat the tears and phlegm shed by people here. Similarly, we should not grieve or worry for those who are living, because grief, worry, does not help them in any way. We should rather care for and help them. Arjuna's limbs were giving way and his mouth was getting parched. The root of such feelings is his identity with the body. Such identity creates affinity for those who nurse this body. That affinity gives birth to grief and worry and thinking of their death. So one is grieved, worried, and sad after thinking of those who are living as well as those who are dead. One is grieved, worried about the dead because deprived of the ritual offerings of rice balls and water. The manis have a downfall. 142. And he is worried about the living ones, because they are arrayed on the battlefield, staking their lives and property. 1133. Both types of worries relate to their bodies, so they are of the same character. The departing soul has to eat and drink the phlegm and tears shed by the relatives. So we should not lament the death of a relative but should perform obsequies. Pathakatandra, Maitrabhata 365. The departing soul hereafter drinks the tears shed by the relatives here. Skanda Purana, Brahma, Saadhu. 48-42. Instead of grieving for those who are dead, we should offer ritual water and rice balls etc., because it is our duty. Similarly, we should make arrangement to care for those who are living. So we should give a serious thought to it, which enables us to understand our duty, while worry, grief, destroys the power of thinking. Discrimination between the real and the unreal is called wisdom, and one who has developed discrimination is known as pandita, wise. Such wise men do not grieve, because they can discriminate between the real and the unreal, the imperishable self, soul, and the perishable body. Grief arises only when the unreal is accepted as real, i.e., when there is a desire to maintain the body forever. For the real, there is no grief or worry at all. Appendix: there is one division of the body, sarira, while another division is of the self, sariri. Both have no relationship at all with each other. Both are quite different in nature. One is insentient while the other is sentient. One is perishable while the other is imperishable. One is mutable while the other is immutable. One is kaleidoscopic while the other remains the same for time immemorial. See Tirthagrarnasaviyam, Gita 8:19. Gita 14:2. The body and the self both are not to be grieved. The body ever perishes, therefore it is not to be grieved, while the self never perishes, therefore it is also not to be grieved. One is grieved only because of one's own folly. The body is continuously separating automatically while the self is ever attained to all. The wise men who know this distinction between the body and the self never grieve for any being whether dead or alive. In their view, the division of the changing body is different from that of the never-changing self, i.e., the ever-existent entity. The Gospel of the Gita begins with the discrimination between the body and the self. Other philosophical classics describe the self and the non-self in an objective manner, and it becomes a matter of study. But the Gita, instead of describing the self and non-self objectively, describes deity, sarira sariri, body and its owner, on the basis of the personal experience of all persons. This is uniqueness of the Hila. The striver who wants to attain salvation first of all must know who I am. Arjuna has also asked Lord Krishna to tell him the highest good for him. Gita 217. Salvation can only be attained by discriminating the self from the body. So long as a man holds I am body, he may listen to gospels, may preach gospels to others, may practice spiritual discipline, but salvation is not possible. It is a blunder to assume, a thing, which is not one's own, as one's own, and to disown a thing which is one's own. Only the thing, which may ever live with us and with which we may ever live, can be our own. The body in the same state doesn't stay with us even for a moment while God ever lives with us. The reason is that the body belongs to the class of the world, while the self belongs to the class of God. Therefore it is the greatest blunder to assume the body as one's own and not to assume God as one's own. In order to rectify this blunder, the Lord in the Gita first of all describes the discrimination between the body and the self and awakens the striver to the fact, you, self, are not the entity which dies, viz., you are not the body. You are the knower while the body is the known. The Hila 13:1. You are eternal and pervade everywhere. Nitya Sarvagata, Gita 2:24, Yana Sarvamatam Tatam, Hila 2:17. While the body is unipresent. You are a resident of the divine world while the body is a resident of the matter, mortal, world. You are a fragment of God. See Mamavam Sojivalok, Gita 1517, while the body is a fragment of Prakriti, nature. Manal 1 Sastanindra Ayani Prakritisthini, Gita 1517. You ever live in immortality while the body ever lives in mortality. By the decay and death of the body you don't decay and die in the least. Therefore, you shouldn't be obsessed by grief, worry and fear, etc. The self is not attached and limited to anybody, therefore it is said to be pervading everywhere. Sarvakita, Gita 2124, Gita 2117. Therefore the true nature of a striver is merely a never-existent entity, not sariri, one having a body, rather it is a sariri, having no relation with the body. Therefore the Lord has also designated it as unmanifest, Gita 2125, unmanifest beings, 2128. The body is decaying every moment and it is as that has no existence. 216. How a striver having relationship with the body even whose existence is not there can be termed sariri. A striver is neither sarira, body, nor sariri, de. In this section the Lord has used the term sariri, de, for the ever-existent entity in order to explain it to the strivers. By calling it as sariri he means to say that a striver is not body. When we reflect upon the nature of the body and the self, we perceive that the body and the self have their own identity, and when we don't reflect upon them, then they have also their own identity. On reflection there is no difference in the reality of their true nature, but by reflecting upon them the striver's delusion is destroyed and the human life becomes successful by attaining its aim. In human life there is predominance of discrimination. Therefore I am not body. This discrimination is possible only in the human body. The sense of I and mine in the body is not the work of human intellect but that of beastly intellect. Therefore Sri Sukadevji Maharaja says to King Pariksit, Srimadbha, 1215-2, King, now give up this beastly intellect that you will die. As the body was non-existent in the past, it was born afterwards and will die in future. It is not the case with you, the self, that you were non-existent in the past, were born afterwards and will die in future. Link in the next two verses. The Lord explains why it is unwise to grieve for what is imperishable. In fact, there was never a time when I or you or these kings were non-existent. Nor is it right that we shall cease to be in future. 12. Comment: there are two things in the world, the soul, the real, and the body, the unreal, and both of these are not to be grieved for, because the soul never ceases to be and the body is ever perishable. So here it is explained that the soul is immortal, while the body is mortal. People think that I did not exist before my incarnation and you and these kings were also non-existent before our birth. But it is not so. All of us certainly existed, because the real is always existent, unaffectedly time, place and circumstances etc. I, you and these kings had their previous existence. This declaration could suffice. But contrarily it is said I, you and these kings had no such pre-existence. This is not true. The reason is that by the latter expression that there was no such pre-existence is not true. The fact of their pre-existence is emphasized. It means that the real is eternal. It was never a naught. By the term jatu, the Lord means to say that in all times past, present and future and in all climes, circumstances, states, incidents and things etc., this real never ceases to be ever. Here, by using the word I am, Lord Krishna identifies himself with other people, in order to explain that the real never ceases to be, while in the 5th verse of the 4th chapter Lord Krishna says, you and I have taken many births. I know them all, while you don't know, which shows that he as the Lord, is different from other. In the 5th verse of the 4th chapter, the Lord expresses his excellence, eminence and glory as compared to ordinary mortals, while in this verse he expresses his unity with the soul of common men. Nakvana bhavisyama sarvyumatapram. In future, the bodies will not continue to be the same and one day they will perish, but the soul will never cease to be, because the real is eternal. It was neither non-existent in the past, nor will be in future. Lord Krishna has talked about the past and the future, by saying that there was never a time when they were non-existent, nor they will cease to be. But he has not talked about the present, because they are clearly seen at present through the bodies. In their present existence, there is no trace of doubt. But if we think seriously, we come to know that we, the soul, exist at present, but the bodies are kaleidoscopic. Therefore we should realize that the soul is different from the bodies, because we have our existence at present as we had in the past and we will have in future, while the bodies are perishable. A man realizes his existence before sleep and after sleep, but he has his existence during sleep also ever while his body is undergoing changes every moment. and it will perish one day. Similarly, the bodies of all of us you and these kings did not exist in the past, nor will exist in future and presently also perishing, every moment, but our self existed in the past, will exist in future, and exist now. Our entity is transcendental as we living subject know time present, past and future objectively. Subject is always distinct from object. Thus the Lord has spoken this verse to explain this transcendental entity of the self. An exceptional fact Lord Krishna, in this verse says that the bodies are perishable while the self is imperishable. It is a rule, that what exists in the beginning and the end, also exists in the middle, and what does not exist in the beginning and the end, does not exist in the middle, either. But the question arises that how, in the middle these bodies are visible? The answer is that senses, mind and intellect, with which we see and worldly objects, which are seen both are perishable and change every moment. Man, self, identifies himself, with the seen. Then, he is called a seer. When the instruments of perception and the objects of perception, are all perishable and transient, then how can the apparent onlooker, be permanent? The apparent entity of a seer, onlooker, is there, because of affinity between the seer, the senses and the seen. In case, there is no such affinity, then this apparent entity of the seer fades away. But, the base of the apparent entity which is truth, persists. That truth, is called the base of creation, preservation, destruction and illuminator of all seeming entities. These names base and illuminator are only in relation to objects which they base and illumine. In the absence of those objects, the truth ever remains, as it is. He who has an eye for that truth, can never grieve. This way, you and these kings, are not to be grieved at all. Appendix: in this verse there is the description that God and the self both are endowed with the same characteristics. The Lord declares, I as Krishna, you as Arjuna and all these people as kings neither existed in the past nor will exist in future. But all of us as ever existent entity existed in the past and will also exist in future. It means that you and these kings, these three are different as far as the bodies are concerned, but they are the same as far as the self is concerned. The bodies neither existed in the past nor will exist in future, but the entity of the soul, self, did exist in the past, shall exist in future and does exist at present. When these bodies didn't exist, the entity of the self was there, and when these bodies will cease to exist, that entity will still remain. There is nothing else except one ever-existent entity. You and these kings. By saying so, the Lord means that the entity of God and entity of the embodied self are one and the same, viz., in is and am there is only one pure consciousness. It is because of ego that am is used. If there is no affinity for ego, then am will not remain but only is will remain. That is, viz., pure consciousness rather than the body is our true identity. Therefore one should not grieve for the body. As an incident of the past and the future is perceived far away, so also is an incident of the present. The reason is that as we, the self, have no connection with the past and the future, similarly we have no connection with the present. When we, the self, have no connection at all with them, then what is the difference between the past, the future and the present for us? These three are within limits of time, but the self transcends the limits of time. Time has divisions while the self is eternal and indivisible. It is only by regarding the body as self that there appears difference between the past, the future and the present. In fact, the past, the future and the present don't exist for the self, it being eternal. Many ages may change, yet Sariri, the self, doesn't undergo any change. It remains the same because it is a fragment of God. But the body does ever change. It doesn't remain the same even for a moment. Just as boyhood, youth and old age, changes in this physical body do not affect the soul, likewise is the change to another body. Wise man never gets disturbed about this. 13. Comment: the body does not remain the same, but it always changes. It passes by stages, through babyhood, youth and old age. The statement Dehinasmanyatadi proves that soul is separate and the body is separate. The soul is the seer, and the body is the seen. Hence the changes of babyhood and youth etc., in the body, are not in the soul. The soul is changeless, as one does not grieve for the body when it passes through babyhood, youth and old age. Similarly one should not grieve, when the soul passes on, to another body. As babyhood, youth and old age are different stages of physical body, so, attaining another body after death, is a stage, for the subtle and causal body. If we perceive in the right perspective, we come to know that the body does not pass through babyhood, youth and old age only, but it changes every moment. Similarly, subtle and causal bodies also change every moment. Now, the question arises that we can perceive our physical body, but we do not perceive our subtle and causal body, and the born one passes through babyhood, youth and old age. But here dia has been used for the human body. The physical body is left by a man, soul, when he attains another body. But subtle and causal bodies are not left until he attains salvation. He has affinity for them so long as he does not attain salvation. Their change, wakefulness, sleep and sound sleep respectively, are regarded as states of physical, subtle and causal bodies. In sleep, dream, a baby sees itself as a baby, a youth sees himself as a youth, and an old man sees himself as an old man. It proves that a subtle body also changes. Similarly, in childhood one gets more sound sleep than in youth, and in old age, it further decreases. It shows that there is a change in causal bodies also. Secondly, a man is more refreshed in his childhood and youth after sleeping than he is in his old age. It also proves the change in causal bodies when one acquires the body of a god, a bird or an animal, etc. Because of identification of the self with the body, one thinks oneself as the same. It is a change in subtle body. Similarly, the nature, habit, of a god is different from that of a bird or an animal. It shows change in causal body. A man passes through babyhood, youth and old age, and thus there is a change in his body, but he experiences that he is the same. It proves that there is no change in his self, soul. Here a doubt comes to our mind that we experience a change in the physical body, but we have no knowledge about our previous bodies after getting new bodies. The answer is that there is so much of pain at the time of death and rebirth that one forgets one's previous birth. When a man suffers from paralysis or old age, his memory becomes weak. Similarly, by the pangs of death and birth, one becomes oblivious of his previous birth. But one who dies suddenly, without any pain, can have a memory of his previous birth. In the sacred books this knowledge is called pratyabhijaya. A man dies by becoming unconscious because of much pain amidst his lamenting kinsmen. Srimad 3:30-18. At the time of death his breath stops and memory is lost. Srimad 3:31-23. The impression of the previous birth of those who die suddenly and then are reborn suddenly continues for some time, but as they grow up, their dreamlike old memory is lost. Mahabharata, Anusasana 145. When a man rises after a sound sleep, he says that he slept soundly and he was not aware of anything. It means that he knows that he was not aware of anything during sound sleep. This knowledge of nothingness, be the self, proves that the self existed even during sound sleep. Thus, his own self existed before his sleep, during his sleep, and also after his sleep, i.e., the self, soul, exists continuously. None feels its non-existence at any time. Rather, he feels his existence incessantly. He who feels himself separate from the body realizes that he is liberated, and in that liberated state he ever remains so. In that liberated state, he may not know what bodies he possessed in the past, but his realization that he is separate from the body remains intact. Dhyarashtatranamyati, the wise man, enlightened one, is he who can discriminate between the real and unreal. Such a man is never deluded and he is not reborn, because attachment for the gunas, qualities, modes, is the cause of birth in good and evil wombs, and he breaks off his attachment with the qualities, modes. Here tatra has been used for the difference between the soul, spirit, and the body, the real and the unreal, the permanent and the transient. It means that these are totally different, and one is never deluded about this, because he knows that he is different from the body. Appendix: the body never remains uniform while the self never becomes multiform. The body neither existed before birth nor will exist after death, and at present also it is dying every moment. In fact, the process of its death begins as soon as it comes to the womb. At the death of boyhood, youth ensues. At the death of youth, Old age ensues, and at the death of the old age, the embodied self passes on to another body. The body undergoes all these states: boyhood, youth and old age. These three states are of the physical body, and passing on of the embodied self to another body is the state of the subtle body and the causal body. But the entity of pure consciousness transcends all these states. The states change while the self remains the same. Thus the enlightened one, who discriminates the distinctiveness of the body from that of the self, is never deluded. The embodied soul, in order to reap the fruit of its actions, goes to numberless wombs, to hell and heaven. This utterance proves that 84 lakh forms of life are left, heaven and hell are left, but the self ever remains the same. Womb, bodies, change, but the self, Saran, doesn't change. The self remains one, so it goes to several wombs and several worlds. The entity which goes to several wombs does not get tainted with anyone, doesn't get entangled anywhere. If it gets tainted and entangled anywhere, then who will reap the fruit in 84 lakh forms of life? Who will go to heaven and hell? Who will attain salvation? Birth and death are not of the self, traits, but are the traits of the body. Our age, viz., age of the self, is beginningless and endless, within which several bodies are born and they die. As we change several clothes, but by changing clothes we ourselves don't change, we remain the same. Gita 2122. Similarly, the entity of the self, even by transmigrating to several bodies, ever remains the same. It means that our freedom and detachment are axiomatic. Our life doesn't depend on a particular body. Because of being detached, we, even by transmigrating to several bodies, remain the same, but by assuming our attachment to the body, we have to take birth in several wombs. The assumed attachment doesn't stay, but we go on getting attached to other things and persons, etc. If we don't get attached to them, salvation, detachment, or independence is self-evident or spontaneous. Link now. Lord Krishna urges us that we should be indifferent to sorrow and suffering, arising from transitory and perishable things, like the body, etc. O son of Kunti, bodily sense objects, which give rise to the feelings of heat and cold, pleasure and pain, are transitory and fleeting. Therefore, Arjuna, bear these patiently, viz., remain unaffected by them or ignore them. 14. Comment. Here a doubt arises that in the verses from the 11th to the 13th and then again from the 16th to the 30th there is a context of the spirit and the body. Why are then these two verses about contacts of senses with objects inserted in between? The explanation is that in the 12th verse, as the Lord placed himself also in the category of the other people, here he wants to say that the body is equally transient as other worldly objects are, and therefore these two verses fit in the context. 2. Indeed, has been used to explain that transitory things, such as bodies, etc., are different from the permanent soul. Mitris L senses, including the inner sense, are called matra, and sparsa means contact. Therefore, all objects which are perceived by senses are called matrasparsiti, bodily senses. Can affinity with objects also be included in matrasparsa? No. The reason is that it is not inner sense, but the self, which accepts this affinity, and that affinity remains even when the objects are lost. A woman bereaved of her husband 50 years ago, and if anyone called her as the wife of her husband Mr. A, she becomes alert, even today. It shows that the affinity with the unreal can perish only if we deny it. Actually, the self has no affinity with the unreal, but it has accepted this affinity, so it can't be rooted out by any other means such as penances, etc. It will be rooted out only when we cease to accept it. Affinity has not yet broken off. It means that though objects are lost, yet the assumed affinity persists. Here, sita, cold, and usna, hot, stand for favorable and unfavorable circumstances. Favorable circumstances give us pleasure, while unfavorable ones give pain. If the terms sita and usna mean cold and heat, then these will represent only objects of touch, and their meanings will be limited. These will not represent all sense objects and circumstances. Therefore, it is proper to take their meanings as favorable and unfavorable circumstances. The fact is that the favorable, desirable, or unfavorable, undesirable, circumstances and things cannot give pleasure or pain, but it is the affinity with them, which is the cause of pleasure and pain. So the Lord has called the objects producers of pleasure and pain. All objects have a beginning and an end, They are born and disappear. So they are agamapathe, i.e., they appear and disappear. Anitya. It may be said that objects may not have pre-existence or post-existence, but in between, they do exist. The Lord declares that as they are anitya, transient, they do not exist even in the interim. They change every moment. They change so swiftly that no one can see them again in the same form, because they do not maintain the same shape the next moment. Therefore, the Lord has called all objects as anitya. It means that all worldly objects are transitory and fleeting, and they change every moment. Not only objects, but the senses, including the inner sense with which we perceive objects, are also transitory. There is always a change in them. For example, the senses get tired by the evening, while working throughout a day, and get refreshed in the morning, after a night's sleep. Here, all objects in a gross sense are called agamapana, appearing and disappearing. In a finer sense, these are called anitya, changing every moment. In a more fine way, they will be described in the 16th verse of this chapter, as asad, non-existent, while the soul described earlier, as eternal, will be called as sat, ever-existent, in the 16th verse of this chapter. Mere knowledge of agreeable and disagreeable senses is not at all defective, but attachment with and aversion to them, or pleasure and pain in relation to them, is a fault. Not to be affected by such an evil is expressed by the expression. Secondly, the body and senses and their actions have a beginning and an end, while you as a spectator are different from them. They always change, but you never change. Therefore, you should remain unaffected by them, i.e., you should ignore them. To remain unaffected, untainted, is called here titiksa, appendix, as the body never remains uniform but changes every moment. Similarly, all the worldly objects, prakriti, viz., nature and its evudes, which are perceived by senses, mind, intellect, never remain uniform. They undergo union and disunion. We feel happy with the union of those objects which we like, and their disunion makes us sad. We feel happy with the disunion of those objects which we don't like, and their union makes us sad. Objects are also fleeting and transient. Similarly, the senses and the inner faculty are also fleeting and transient, and the pleasure or pain caused by the union or disunion of these objects is also fleeting and transient. But the self ever remains the same. It is immutable and eternal. Therefore one should bear them, pleasure and pain, patiently, viz., one shouldn't feel happy and sad by their union and disunion, but remain unaffected by them. Pleasure and pain both are different, but their seer is one, and he is separate, unaffected, from both of them. By seeing the changeable, the immutability of the self, soul is naturally perceived as the unchangeable only can see the changeable. Hence the term sita stands for favorableness, while usna stands for unfavorableness. It means that when it is very much cold, a tree dries up, and when it is very hot, then also a tree dries up. Therefore the result of both hot and cold is only one. Therefore the Lord orders to bear them, viz., to rise above them. Pleasure, pain, joy, grief, attachment, aversion, desire, anger, are fleeting and kaleidoscopic, while the self, soul, remains the same. A seeker commits a blunder that he sees the changing condition but doesn't perceive the self. He accepts the condition but doesn't accept the self. The condition neither existed in the past nor will exist in future, therefore it doesn't exist at present also, though it appears to exist. But in the self there is neither beginning nor end nor middle at all. A condition never remains uniform, and the self never becomes multiform. Whatever is seen is a condition, and the intellect which sees it is also a condition. The thing which is to be known is a condition, and the thing which knows it is also a condition. In the self there is neither anything to be seen nor there is one who sees it. There is nothing to be known nor one who knows it. The object to be seen and he who sees it, etc., are subject to conditions. The object to be seen and the seer who sees it will not remain, but the self will remain, because the condition will perish but the self will remain. It means that by having connection with the object to be seen, the self becomes the spectator. If it has no connection with the object to be seen, the self will remain, but it will not be named as the spectator. In the same way the self, pure consciousness, by having affinity for sarna, body, is called sariri. If it has no relationship with the body, the self will remain, but it will not be named sariri, Gita 1311. Therefore the Lord has used the term sariri for the self or pure consciousness in order to merely explain it to human beings. Link in the next verse, Lord Krishna talks of the result of remaining unaffected with objects. O the best of men, a person to whom pain and pleasure are alike, and who is not tormented by these sense objects, becomes eligible for immortality. 15. Men generally try to change inevitable circumstances. But, Arjuna, instead of trying to change these, has thought of attaining benediction, which shows that he is the best of men. A resolute person remains alike in pleasure and pain. He experiences pleasure and pain only when he is attached to three gunas, qualities, modes, born of matter, nature. Gita 13,120-21. But when he gets immersed in the self, he does not experience pleasure and pain, and becomes unruffled. To a man of steady wisdom, the sense objects do not give pain. Pleasure, ensuing from the contact of sense objects, is perturbing, vyatha. Similarly, pain arising from their separation is also disconcerting. He who has a knife or equanimity cannot be happy or sad by these objects. Such a person knows what are favorable and unfavorable circumstances, but he remains unaffected by them. They do not leave any impression on his mind. Such a man of steady wisdom becomes eligible for immortality, viz., he acquires the capability of realizing immortality. Being capable, he realizes immortality instantly, because his immortality is axiomatic. It was only because of one's affinity with objects, body etc., that it was obscure. A special word this human life has not been bestowed upon man to experience pleasure and pain, but to attain the supreme bliss, having obtained which, he has nothing else to seek. Gita 6:22. If we remain greedy and desirous of acquiring favorable circumstances, we shall not be able to make use of those circumstances, because our energy will be wasted in the enjoyment of those circumstances, rather than in making proper use of these. Similarly, if we grieve over unfavorable circumstances or in their possibility, we will not be able to make use of them, rather we will be brooding over these. To get pleased over favorable circumstances is their enjoyment. The use of favorable circumstances, for mere maintenance of a body, and for the welfare of poverty-stricken people, is their proper use. Thus, riches in the form of favorable circumstances should be considered as property of the poor. We should neither be pleased with desirable circumstances, nor displeased with undesirable ones, but we should make the best possible use of these. Otherwise, we shall have to suffer pain. It is a proper use of desirable circumstances, if having satisfied our needs, we use these to serve the needy and the destitute, instead of enjoying these ourselves. Actually, our riches are for the needy and the poor, so we should utilize these for their welfare. These are the poor and the destitute, who have enabled the rich to be proud of their riches. Had all others been multimillionaires, could these millionaires have had pleasure and pride out of their being millionaires? No. The poor and destitute people are the cause of their pleasure and pride. Therefore, the rich people should serve the desolate and the destitute, as it is their duty to do so. But if they don't do so and enjoy the riches themselves, they only are thankless. Now, the question arises, how to make use of undesirable circumstances? The answer is that undesirable circumstances are painful when there is desire for pleasure. If that desire is renounced, then undesirable circumstances cannot be painful. If a patient is given bitter medicines and painful injections, he is not upset, rather he is pleased, because he knows that bitter medicines and painful injections are cures for his disease. Thus, it is the proper use of undesirable circumstances to bear pain, without having any grudge against it. If one gets displeased with bitter medicines etc., then that is brooding over unfavorable circumstances. It will result in great misery. If we enjoy pleasure and are tormented by pain, we may get heaven or hell but cannot be eligible for salvation, because salvation is attained by those who remain alike in pleasure and pain. The Lord, in the 14th verse, has said that objects give rise to feelings of pleasure and pain, but these are transitory and fleeting. The moment we acquire them, their decay and parting starts. These were neither with us in the past, nor will remain in future and present, also they are going to be naught. But by enjoying these we are spoiling our nature, and are depriving ourselves of attainment of salvation. Therefore, if we make proper use of the available circumstances, we shall rise above pleasure and pain, and attain a state of the highest bliss. Appendix: the self is in the form of an entity. In that entity there is no perturbation. When the self identifies itself with the body, then perturbation ensues. Therefore a person who assumes himself to be seated in the body can't be free from torment. Freedom from torment means not to rejoice on obtaining what is pleasant and not to grieve on receiving what is unpleasant. Gyro 520. By being free from torment a man's intellect, understanding, becomes firm. See Sir Buddhira Samurfda, Gita 520. To rejoice and to grieve in favorable and unfavorable circumstances means to be tormented. To rejoice and to grieve is bhaga of pleasure and pain. The seeker of pleasure and sufferer in pain can never be happy. A striver should not rejoice and grieve in favorable and unfavorable circumstances but should utilize these circumstances. The favorable and the unfavorable circumstances are determined by fate, and to utilize those circumstances by regarding them as material for spiritual progress is the real valor. This valor results in immortality. Utilization of favorable circumstances is to provide happiness to others and to render service to them, while the utilization of unfavorable circumstances is to renounce the desire for pleasure or favorable circumstances. By utilizing the unfavorable circumstances a striver discovers the reason for pain. The reason for pain is the desire for pleasure. Gita 522. The person, Bogai, who enjoys pleasure and suffers pain has a downfall, while he, yogi, who utilizes pleasure and pain, by rising above pleasure and pain, attains immortality. Link in the next 3 verses also. The nature of the real, spirit, and the unreal, matter, body, is dwelt. The unreal has no existence and the real, never ceases to be. The truth of both these, has been perceived by seers of truth. 16. Comment: this body, neither existed in the past, before birth, nor will exist in the future after death, and is also perishing, at present. Thus, actually it is non-existent. This body is the world in miniature. The change in the body signifies the change in the world. Similarly, the non-existence of a body signifies the non-existence of the world in all the times. The entire world is burning like wood continuously in the fire of time. On firewood being burned, ash remains. But this time fire consumes the world, in such a way that no remains are left. There is total annihilation of the world. Therefore, it has been said, that the unreal has no existence. Nabhava Vidyate Satta: the real never ceases to be. The Atma, spirit or soul, remains constant. It existed, before the birth of the body, exists now, when the body is undergoing change, and will exist, after the death of the body. Similarly, God also ever remains the same, while the world undergoes a change, every moment. A vital fact: the world is kaleidoscopic, it changes every moment. So it cannot be seen in the same state, the very next moment. Bodies are taking birth, and dying every moment, but the process is not perceived, with these dull physical eyes. Similarly, the world is also perishing, all the time. But it is not perceived, because the senses, mind and intellect etc., also belong to the same class, to which the world belongs. So, how can the perishable perceive the perishable? Only the imperishable, self, spirit, can perceive it. Secondly, the self cannot perform any activity, without assistance of the world, body, senses, mind and intellect. It proves, that all activities take place in the world rather than in the self. The self has no affinity with activities and objects. It proves, that the world, with body, mind, senses and intellect etc., is non-existent. Only the super-soul, God, is ever existent, who ever remains untainted and is the basis and illuminator of the entire world. Seers of truth have perceived the truth about the real and the unreal, or that though there is a continuous process of birth and death of bodies, yet the process is not perceived because of the subtle speed of time, soul and the body. The fact is, that the real is ever existent, the unreal has no existence, but it seems to exist because of the light of the real. Therefore the essence of the real, Sat, and the unreal, Asat, is Sat, ever existent. The real has been called as Paraprakriti, higher or sentient nature, Gita 7:5, Ksetrajvaya, self, soul, Gita 13:1-2, Purusa, spirit, Gita 13:19, and X0, the imperishable, Gita 15:16, while the unreal has been called apara-prakriti, lower or insentient nature, etc., non-self, prakriti, matter, and X0, the perishable. Arjuna is grieved by thinking that the warriors will die. So, the Lord explains that the real never dies, and the unreal never exists as it is continuously dying. Therefore, it is not wise to grieve. In the 11th verse, it has been said that Pandita, the wise, grieve neither for the living, nor for the dead. In the 12th and 13th verses the word dhira, wise or enlightened, has been used for the person who realizes the distinction between the soul and the body. In the 15th verse also dhira has been used for a person who does not grieve over the decay of the body and the world. In the 16th verse Tattvadarsi, the seers of truth, has been used for a discerning person who distinguishes between the real and unreal. All these words dhira etc. show that the wise do not grieve, and if they grieve, it means that they are not wise. Appendix: the ever-existent entity, self, is real and accepted entity. Whatever prakriti, nature, and its attributes, actions and objects, are, they are all unreal and kaleidoscopic. Those great souls who have perceived the truth about both the real and the unreal, viz., those who have realized the self, hold that the unreal has no existence and the real never ceases to be, viz., there is nothing except that entity, the real. The Lord in the 14th and 15th verses described the transitory nature of the body. Here the same has been described by the expression nasato vidyate bhava, the unreal has no existence, and in the 12th and 13th verses the eternal nature of the sariri, self, was described. That has been mentioned here by the expression nabhavo vidyate sata, the real never ceases to be. In these 16 letters there is the gist of all the Vedas, Puranas and scriptures. Asat and Sat, these two have been called by several names such as Prakriti, nature, and Purusa, self, X0, perishable, and X0, imperishable, Sarira, body, and Sari, self, transitory and eternal, perishable and imperishable, etc. Whatever is seen, heard, understood, thought of and determined, etc., is unreal, and the organs of senses, by which the actions of seeing, hearing and thinking etc. are done, are also unreal, and whatever seen is also unreal. In the half verse, 16 letters, 3 roots have been used: 1. Bhusatyam as abhava and bhava, 2. Asphuvi as asata and sata, 3. Vidsatyam as vidyate and navidyate. Although these 3 roots mean only an entity, yet in their subtle form they have also their independent meanings, as the meaning of bhai-root is utpatti, origin, the meaning of as-root is sata, entity, existence, and the meaning of vid-root is vidyamanata, existence of the present. The meaning of the expression nasato vidyate bhava means asata bhava navidyate, viz., the unreal has no existence, or the unreal is non-existent because it is continuously perishing, changing. The unreal is not present. The unreal is not acquired. The unreal is not constant. The thing which is born certainly dies. This is the rule. As soon as it is born, it starts perishing at once. It perishes so quickly that no one can see it 2 times, viz., having seen it once, it can't be seen in the same condition the second time. This is the principle that the thing which has no existence at any time is always non-existent. Therefore the world is always non-existent. However existence we may give to the world, however importance, value, we may attach to it, but it doesn't exist at all. The unreal is neither acquired, nor was acquired, nor will ever be acquired. It is not possible to acquire the unreal. This expression means sata abhava navidyate, viz., the real never ceases to be, rather the real is existent. It is never non-existent, changeable. The entity which ceases to be is not called the real. The entity of the real is ever existent. The real is ever present. The real is ever attained. The real is ever constant. The real never ceases to be in any place, thing, person, action, incident, circumstance, state and time, etc. The reason is that the place, time and thing, etc., are unreal, kaleidoscopic, but the real ever exists the same. In it there is never any change. It never ceases to be. Therefore the real is ever existent. To whatever extent we may deny the existence of the Supreme Soul, to whatever extent we may neglect him, to whatever extent we may have disinclination for him, to whatever extent we may disregard him, To whatever extent we may contradict his existence by giving arguments, but he never ceases to be. The non-existence of the real is not possible. No one can destroy the imperishable entity. Gita 2:17. Seers of truth have not created, produced, the real entity, but they have seen it, viz., perceived the truth about it. It means that non-existence of the unreal and existence of the real, the truth of both of these, have been perceived by the liberated enlightened souls who perceive only the real entity, viz., realize the self-evident is. The base of the unreal is also real, and the truth about the real is also real. By knowing this, in the view of the exalted souls, no other entity except the real entity remains. The non-existence of the unreal and the existence of the real prove that only the real exists. In that real entity there is no such duality as dia, body, and a, self. So long as the unreal's existence is assumed, there is discrimination. But when the unreal ceases to exist, then discrimination changes into self-realization. In this expression in Ubarapi there is discrimination, in Anta there is self-realization, and in Jirsa there is perception of the real, viz., discrimination change into self-realization, and only the entity remained. There is nothing except that entity. This is the most important fact of the discipline of knowledge. The unreal has no existence. This is true, and the real never ceases to be. This is also true. It is the duty of a striver to accept this truth. A striver may have this realization or not. He has to accept this fact. One has to accept the entity is, and to deny no. This is Vedanta. This is the main gist of the Vedas. In the world, in spite of the appearance of both existence and non-existence, there is predominance of non-existence. In God also both of them appear, but there is predominance of existence. In the world within non-existence there are existence and non-existence, and in God within existence there are existence and non-existence. In other words, in the world within eternal disunion there are union and disunion, while in God within eternal union there are union and disunion, meeting separation. Therefore in the world only non-existence persists, while in God only existence persists. Link in the next two verses, there is description of the real and the unreal. Know that to be imperishable, by which all this world is pervaded, for none can bring about the destruction of the indestructible. 17. Comment here too, indeed, has been used to explain Sat the real out the two Sat, real, and Asat, unreal, described in the preceding verse. The Lord advises Arjuna to realize that imperishable entity. He explains that this entity is abstract. By calling it abstract, paraksa, the Lord means to say that this abstract imperishable entity is pervading the whole world, which appears as separate from that entity. In reality, only this all-pervading entity exists, while the world which appears to exist does not exist really. By the term tat, that, it is not meant to say that Sattva, the real, stands afar, but it means that it is not a subject of senses and inner sense. The abstract entity is described here. This whole world is pervaded by that imperishable entity. As ornaments made of gold have nothing but gold, weapons made of iron have nothing but iron, pots of clay have nothing but clay, and in ice there is nothing but water. Similarly, this world is pervaded by Sat, real, imperishable. So, in the world, there is nothing to be realized except the real. The spirityana sarvamadrantitam has been used in the Gita 3 times. Here it has been used for the imperishable by which the whole world is pervaded. It is described with the view of Sankhyayoga, the discipline of knowledge. In the 22nd verse of the 8th chapter it has been used for God, Supreme Purusa, who can be attained by exclusive devotion. Again in the 46th verse of the 18th chapter there is the description, by whom all this is pervaded, which also is with the point of view of devotion. Soul is imperishable, while the body is perishable, and is perishing every moment. No one can check its process of destruction. But whether you wage war or withdraw from it, the imperishable cannot be destroyed and the perishable can't be saved. Here the word asya means that whatever reality appears in the kaleidoscopic body is because of real entity, self, and that self, spirit, is different from the body. Appendix: in practical life we say, this is a man, this is an animal, this is a tree, this is a house, etc. In these expressions man, animal, tree, house, etc., neither existed in the past nor will exist in future, and at present also they are perishing every moment. But in them the eternal reality is ever remains the same. It means that man, animal, tree, house, etc., are the world, unreal, and as is the imperishable self, the real. Therefore man, animal, tree, house etc., are different, but in all of them is, eternal reality, remains the same. Similarly in I am a man, I am an animal, I am a god etc., bodies are different but am or is remains the same. This expression here has been used for the embodied soul, while in the 22nd verse of the 8th chapter and in the 46th verse of the 18th chapter, this expression has been used for God. It means that the self has the same characteristics as all-pervading God has. Therefore as God is detached from the world, so is the self naturally detached from the body and the world. Asango Hyam Purusa, Brihada. 4.3.15, Dehesman Purusa Para, Gita 13.22. The self is not seated in a particular body. It is not attached to any body. But without realizing this detachment, it is following the cycle of birth and death. In the Gita the Lord has called the spirit as well as himself imperishable. But the difference is that the Lord incarnates and conceals himself by his free will, while the spirit seated in matter takes birth and dies because it identifies itself with the body. These bodies acquired by the imperishable, indefinable and eternal soul, are spoken of as perishable. Therefore, 0 Arjuna, fight. 18 Comment in Asana. A thing, which never changes, never decays and never gets extinct, in the least, by any cause, under any circumstances, is called honest. The soul, spirit, is not exposed to destruction or change. So, it is indestructible or imperishable. The soul is beyond the domain of senses, speech and mind, so it is indefinable. It can be experienced only by having faith in scriptures, and saints and their gospels. The scriptures and saints do not compel anyone to have faith in them. One is free to have such faith or not to have it. In case one reposes faith in them, that tattva, reality, is the object of his faith. Otherwise it is not the object of his faith. Nityasya, the soul, does not undergo any change. It never ceases to be. It exists all the time. Antivantayam Dhyayukta. Sarirana. These bodies, of imperishable, indefinable and eternal soul, are spoken of as perishable, i.e., they have an end. It means that these are perishing, every moment. They are nothing but a mass of decay. In the above sentence, a singular number has been used for the soul, while plural for the bodies. Firstly, it is so because the bodies of every embodied soul are of three kinds: physical, subtle and causal, and secondly because a single soul pervades all worldly bodies. Further, in the 24th verse, the Lord calls it all-pervading, viz., omnipresent. It means that all the bodies are perishable, while soul is imperishable. An exceptional fact: all the bodies which are perceptible are perishable, while the soul is imperishable and eternal. But this immortal soul, though different from body, identifies itself with the body and develops an ego-orness with it, and thus regards its death as self's, soul's, death. He who identifies himself with wealth and learning etc., calls himself as wealthy and learned etc. Similarly, when one accepts a body as one's own, one develops the feeling of attachment or mindness for it, and this attachment extends to wealth and family etc., because he accepts these as his own, by having affinity with these. By this affinity of ness and mindness, all evils are born. One cannot discriminate between the real and the unreal, and is thus grieved, while the wise are not grieved, because they realize that the real cannot perish and the unreal cannot exist. Lord Krishna directs Arjuna to fight, i.e., discharge his duty, by discriminating between the real and unreal. He means to say that he should not grieve but wage war, because the soul is imperishable, while bodies are perishable. An exceptional fact: in the 17th and 18th verses, there is a notable explanation of the real and the unreal, because the Lord wants Arjuna to realize the real. By realizing the essence, one gets rid of the unreal spontaneously. Thus, by realizing this fact, he would discharge his duty. It shows that every human being, without any distinction of caste, creed, color or stage of life, can freely follow either the discipline of action, or discipline of knowledge, for his salvation. But, in practical life, a duty should be discharged. Here the word tasmit has been used for drawing a conclusion after reasoning. In the arm, tasmit has been used either for drawing the conclusion after reasoning or at the end of a context. In 230, 319, 810 and 827 verses it has been used at the end of a context, while in 225, 227, 237, 268, and 1133 it has been used to conclude reasoning. According to one's varna, caste, and asrama, stage of life, by following the ordinance of scriptures. Therefore, here while discussing the real and the unreal according to the discipline of knowledge, Lord Krishna orders Arjuna to fight, or in other words he advises Arjuna to discharge his duty even if he follows discipline of knowledge. Further, in the 13th chapter, where there is a description of virtues of knowledge, Lord Krishna in 13.9 also lays emphasis on non-attachment and non-identification of the self with a son, wife, home, etc. If only hermits had deserved the discipline of knowledge, Sankhya, the Lord would not have mentioned the need for non-attachment and non-identification of the self with a son, wife, home, etc., because hermits have no sons, wives and homes, etc. Thus, by meditating on the Gita, both the disciplines of knowledge, as well as action, karma, have proved to be independent means for God realization for all human beings, without distinction of any varna or stage of life. Appendix: the Lord at the outset of his gospel explained that both gatasam, dead, and agatasam, living, are not to be grieved for. Then in the 12th and 13th verses, in order to explain that agatasam is not to be grieved, he explained the real, the eternal, and in the 14th and 15th verses, in order to explain that agatasam is not to be grieved, he described the unreal, the transitory. Then he explained both sat, the real, and asat, the unreal, in the 16th verse. After that, by discussing the existence of the real and non-existence of the unreal, especially in the 17th and 18th verses, he completes this subtopic. Though there is existence only of the soul, not of the body, yet a man commits an error that he first sees the body and then perceives the soul in it. First sees the form, appearance, then perceives the existence. How long will this outward polish stay? A striver should reflect upon whether the soul, self, existed first or the body existed first. On reflection it is proved that first there is the self and then there is the body. The existence is first and the appearance is afterwards. Therefore a striver first should perceive the self as existent, not the body. Link up to the previous verse, there is description of seers who know the soul as imperishable. In the next verse, Lord Krishna, to emphasize the same fact, speaks of those who do not regard the soul as indestructible, by a negative inference. Both of them are ignorant, one who holds the soul as the slayer and the other who considers it as slain. For the soul neither slays, nor is slain. 19 Comment: one who considers the soul as slayer is ignorant because the soul does not act. But by identifying with the body, it accepts itself as a doer. As an artisan, however clever he may be, cannot work without tools. Similarly, the soul without body cannot do anything. Therefore, the Lord, in the 13th chapter, declares that he who sees that all actions are performed by Prakriti, nature, alone, realizes the self as non-doer. 1329. It means that the self is not a doer, but, by identifying itself with body, it assumes itself to be the doer of actions performed by the body. If a man does not identify himself with the body, he is not at all a doer of any activity. One who holds the soul as slain is also ignorant. As the soul is never the slayer, so it is never killed, because the soul always remains unaffected and unchanged. Only the perishable and changeable can be slain. How could the imperishable and unchangeable be slain? Both of these, who holds the soul as slayer, and he, who considers it as slain, are ignorant. A question arises, whether he, who holds the soul as slayer, as well as slain, is not ignorant. The answer is, that he is also ignorant, because the soul is neither a destroyer, nor can it be destroyed. It is always the same, without any change. Therefore, one should not grieve. The soul has been described, neither as a slayer nor as slain, because it was in the context of war, before Arjuna. But, actually the soul is free from all ascites and modifications. Appendix: this Sariri, the possessor of the body, neither slays anyone nor is slain by anyone. It means that it is neither a doer of an action nor is an object of action nor is affected in any way. Those who, like the body, hold the Sariri as the slayer and as the slain, Indeed, don't attach importance to the discrimination between the body and the self, but attach importance to indiscrimination. Link in the next verse the Lord explains how this soul is immortal. For the soul there is neither birth nor death, nor does it come into existence after having been born. It is unborn, eternal, constant and primeval. It is not killed, even when the body is slain. 20. Comment: the body, constituted of elements, undergoes 6 kinds of modifications: to be born, to exist, to change, to grow, to decay and to perish. But the soul remains unaffected by these changes. The Lord explains this fact in this verse. The soul, unlike a body, is never born, it is eternal. So the Lord in 15:7 has declared, "This soul and the body is an eternal portion of myself." The soul never dies. Only that which is born dies. The soul remains unaffected by all kinds of changes. Of all these changes, birth and death are the most important ones. Therefore, the Lord has used Nagyate and Naja for the unborn, and also Namriyate and Nahanyate Hanyamain Sarair for the unslain. Twice. This imperishable element does not exist on coming into being, unlike a child that exists after birth and has a beginning and an end. It is free from different kinds of changes and is without beginning and end. Aja. This soul is never born, so it is called Aja, viz., unborn. Nitya. The soul is eternal. It does never decay in the least, while the bodies and senses decay and lose their strength. Satvita. The soul is constant and changeless. Prana. It is ancient and primeval. Generally a thing which becomes old does not grow, it rather perishes. But the soul neither grows nor perishes. Nahanyate Hanyamain Sarair. The soul is not slain even when the body is slain. Lord Krishna means to say that the body undergoes 6 modifications because it is perishable, while the soul is imperishable. Here in these verses Lord Krishna has made such a distinction between the body and the soul, as is rarely found anywhere else in the Gita. Arjuna was grieved after thinking about the death of his kinsman in a war. So Lord Krishna wants to explain to him that the soul is not killed even when the body is slain, so he should not grieve. Appendix Hour of the self, nature and the nature of the body are quite different. We, the self, are not attached to the body, are not mingled with the body. The body is not attached to us, it is not mixed with us. Therefore at the death of the body we are not affected at all. By now we have passed through innumerable bodies, but what difference did it make in our entity, existence? What loss did we sustain? We remain the same. Buddhagrama Savyam Bhattva Pralayate, Gita 8:19. Similarly at the death of the body will remain the same, as hands, feet and nose etc. are organs of the body. Likewise the body is not an organ of the self. That which flows and varies is not an organ of the imperishable, as phlegm and urine etc. flow, and an ulcer, boil, varies, so they are not organs of the body. Similarly the body which flows and varies is not an organ of the self. Link in the 19th verse, Lord Krishna told Arjuna the soul neither slays, nor is slain. In the 20th verse, he explained how it is not slain. Now, in the next verse, he explains how it does not slay. O Partha, how can a man who realizes this soul to be imperishable, eternal and free from birth and decay, slay anyone or cause anyone to be slain? 21. Comment: the man who realizes this soul to be imperishable, eternal and free from birth and decay, can have no inclination to slay anyone or cause anyone to be slain. He is free from egoism, i.e., he has no feeling of an agent in him, and so actions do not taint him. Here, Lord Krishna has explained that the soul is free from the 6 kinds of modifications, i.e., to be born, to exist, by the term Aja, to change, to grow by the term Nitya, to decay by the term Avyam, and to perish by the term Avinasi. Now, a question arises: if the Lord by the terms Nahanyate Hanyamain Sarair and Kamgatayati Hadi Kam had merely to tell Arjuna that the soul is neither a doer nor an object of action, then why he used words not a slayer or not a slain for the soul? The answer is that the theme is of a war, so it is necessary to say so. But he means that the soul is neither the agent, doer, nor the object of action. Therefore, one while discharging duty should not grieve while slaying anyone nor causing anyone to be slain, but should discharge one's duty, in accordance with the ordinance of scriptures. Appendix: a thing which is produced, born, certainly perishes, it has not to be perished, destroyed. But the thing which is not born, never perishes. We passed through 84 lakh forms of bodies, but no body stayed with us. And we didn't stay with any body, but we remained the same and apart. Those bodies didn't possess this power of discrimination, but only this human body has been endowed with it. If we don't realize it, we disregard the discrimination bestowed upon us by God. Links in the next verse. Lord Krishna explains that the soul is free from change by giving an illustration. As a person discarding worn-out clothes, puts on new ones, so an embodied soul, casting out old bodies, enters into others, which are new. 22 Comment in the 13th verse of this chapter. It has been mentioned in brief that Ayasman does no get diluted, when the soul transmigrates from one body to another. Now, Lord Krishna by giving an illustration explains, that as a man by casting off old clothes is not grieved, so a man casting off worn-out bodies should not grieve. Here the word nara, man, has been used for a human being, including men, women, boys, girls, young, old, etc. All. As a man discarding old clothes, puts on new ones, so does an embodied soul, casting off worn-out bodies, enter into new bodies. The casting off of worn-out bodies is called death, while its acquiring new bodies is called birth. So long as this embodied soul has connection with Prakriti, it goes on acquiring new bodies, according to actions of the past, or according to thoughts at the moment of death. Here the term sarirani, bodies, has been used in plural form. It means that so long as an embodied soul does not get emancipated, it goes on acquiring new bodies, up to eternity. The bodies it has acquired are countless. The term dead has been used to indicate all embodied souls. In the first half of this verse, there is mention of discarding of worn-out clothes, while in the second half, there is reference to casting off worn-out bodies. So, how can the illustration of old clothes befit bodies, when bodies of even children and young men die? The answer is that end of age means the worn-out bodies, whether they are of children, young men or old men. In this verse, the Lord by using the terms yatha, as, and tatha, so, has explained that as a man, discarding worn-out clothes, puts on new ones, so does an embodied soul, casting off worn-out bodies, acquire other bodies, which are new. Here, a doubt arises, that a man is free in casting off old clothes and putting on new ones, but he is not free to cast off an old body and enter into a new one. The answer is that Lord Krishna does not mean to talk about freedom and dependence. His aim is to dispel the grief arising from the separation of a body. One should not grieve over the death of a body, because the soul remains unattached and unchanged. From this angle, this example is appropriate. Another question that arises is that a man is happy by discarding old clothes and putting on new ones, whereas he feels grieved while casting off an old body and getting into a new one. The reason is that a man by identifying himself with the body, wants to live long and thinks of the death of the body as his own death. Thus, he gets sad. The grief, sadness, is the result of the desire to live, not because of death. If we perceive by applying our discrimination, we come to know that the body is wearing out every moment and it reaches a stage when it completely dies. But we don't realize this fact because we don't pay attention to it. This is darkness or ignorance, lack of discrimination. This desire is latent, and he has to die, and that causes grief. But if he were to discriminate between the real and the unreal, he need not be sad, he rather rejoices. Thus, it is because of his ignorance that he weeps. In his ignorance, he is like a child, who weeps, while his old clothes are taken away and he is made to put on new ones. To remove this ignorance, the Lord has used yatva, as, and tatha, so, words, by giving an illustration of clothes. Lord Krishna has used the verb granati for putting on clothes and saranyati, enter, for embodied soul, because people generally think out of ignorance that man changes clothes, living at his own place, while an embodied soul has to go and enter new bodies. So Lord Krishna has used these two verbs, keeping the worldly point of view in mind. Something noteworthy in the Gita in Yana Sarvamadritam, 2117, in Nitya Sarvakitastinu, 224, phrases, the soul has been described as all-pervading, eternal, omnipresent and constant. while in phrases such as Saranyadi Navalnidi, 222, and Sarayaram Yadvapnuti, 15:8, it is said that the soul migrates, enters, into another body. So, there seems to be a contrast, but in fact, there is none. For example, when a person grows from his babyhood to youth, he says that he has grown young, but the fact is, that he is the same. It is the body which has grown young. By identifying himself with the body, he grafts the change of his body upon himself. Therefore, in fact the soul does not migrate, but, because of its identification with bodies, it seems to migrate. Now, a question arises, why this cycle of birth and death has been going on from times immemorial. From the viewpoint of the discipline of action, to reap the fruit of virtuous and evil actions, and from the viewpoint of the discipline of knowledge due to ignorance, and from the viewpoint of the discipline of devotion, due to disinclination for God, this cycle of birth and death goes on. The basic factor behind these three is, that God has granted liberty to living beings, to make proper use of their lives, but they misuse it and so they have to go through a cycle of birth and death. They can be free from this cycle, by making proper use of this liberty. It means, that if they start working for the welfare of others, by renouncing their selfishness, they will be free from this cycle. Moreover, negligence and discrimination is the root cause of birth and death. If we attach importance to discrimination, we can be free from the shackles of birth and death. Similarly, disinclination for God is the cause of birth and death, which can be eliminated by having an inclination for Him. Appendix: a man wants new articles, so the Lord also gives him new articles, body, etc., material. When the body grows old, God bestows upon him the new body. Therefore having new desires is the cause of his birth and death. Those who have new desires will get new things times without number. In a man there is one power of the will and another of the life breath. If he has power of the will and his life breath ends, he has to be reborn. If he has no will, desire, he has not to take rebirth when his life breath ends. An illustration is applicable only to a certain extent, not to the full extent. Here the illustration of casting off old clothes and putting on new ones is applicable to the extent that as a man, by changing several clothes, remains the same. Similarly the self, by casting off worn-out bodies and by acquiring several new bodies, remains the same. As by casting off old clothes we don't die and by putting on new clothes we are not born. Negligence and discrimination means that we don't act according to what we know. We know that it is wrong to tell a lie, but still we do so in order to achieve selfish ends. We know that it is wrong to give pain to others, but we derive sadistic pleasure in torturing others. Similarly we know that bodies are perishable but we have attachment and infatuation for them. This is known as an affront to our knowledge. Similarly by casting off worn-out bodies, we don't die and by acquiring new bodies, we are not born. It means that the body dies, we, the self, don't die. If we die, who will reap the fruit of virtuous and sinful actions? Who will acquire new bodies? Who will be in bondage? Who will attain salvation? Link in the next 3 verses. There is the description that the soul is supermundane. Weapons cannot cut the soul, nor can fire burn it, water cannot drench it, nor can wine make it dry. 23 Comment: weapons cannot cut the soul because they are made of the earth element which cannot even reach the soul. So how can they hurt the soul? Now Nirndahatipa fire cannot burn the soul, because the soul is beyond the reach of fire. It means that fire can never bring any change ever in it. Water cannot drench the soul because water cannot wet it. Water can never bring any change in it. Naso, wind cannot dry the soul because it is beyond the reach of wind. It can never bring any change in the least in it. Thus out of the 5 gross elements 4 cannot hurt the soul. Now, the question arises, why has Lord Krishna not mentioned the 5th element, ether? The answer is, that Akasa, ether, is actionless. Earth, water, fire, wind are born of ether and these are incapable of acting on ether. Therefore, when they cannot even hurt ether, how can they hurt the soul, which is beyond the reach of even matter or nature, prakriti? These elements with attributes cannot reach the soul, which is without any attributes. Gita 13:31. The soul is eternal. All the 4 elements such as the earth etc. are activated by the power of the soul. So, how can they impair the soul, the source of their power? The soul is all-pervading, while the 4 elements, such as the earth etc., are the pervaded ones. How can the pervaded ones hurt the all-pervading one? Here, the context is of war. Arjuna is grieved at the thought of the imminent death of his kinsman. Therefore, Lord Krishna explains to Arjuna that the soul cannot be hurt by any weapons. A weapon can cut the body, not the soul. A fire-emitting missile can burn the body, but not the soul. The Neptune noose, Varuna weapon, can drench a body but not the soul, and the wind missile can dry the body but not the soul. It means that the soul is not hurt by any weapons and missiles. It remains the same, while it is the body alone which decays and dies. So, it is sheer ignorance to lament for it. Appendix: we say, this is a body, there is a change in the body, but in is, sarin, there is no change. Similarly, when we say, there is wood or timber, then there is variation in wood, not in is. Wood is cut, is not cut. Wood burns, is does not burn. Wood becomes wet, is doesn't get wet. Wood dries, is does not get dry. Wood never remains uniform while is never becomes multiform. This soul is uncleavable, incombustible, and neither can be wetted nor dried. It is eternal, all-pervading, stable, constant and everlasting. 24 Comment: in this verse it is described why weapons etc. cannot hurt this soul. This soul is incapable of being cut. Even incantation and curse cannot cut this soul, while they can cut the body. As Sakliya was beheaded by Yajnavalkya's curse, because the former could not answer the latter's questions. Adehyo Yam: this soul cannot be burnt by fire, because it is impervious to fire. It cannot be burned even by incantation and curses, as the hunter was burnt to ashes by Damayanti's curse. Only that can be burnt by fire, which is prone to fire. The soul is beyond burning. The soul is impervious to water. Water, incantation, curse and medicines etc. cannot drench it. As it is said, that the tune of Malikosa song wets a stone, and moonlight wets the moon gem. But the soul cannot be wetted by them. The soul cannot be dried by wind, incantation, curse and medicines etc., as sage Agastya dried the sea. By using these two words, Lord Krishna means to say, that the soul is beyond the reach of any action. So it should not be grieved for. The soul is eternal. It remains the same all the time. The soul pervades all men, things and bodies etc. equally. It is immovable. There is no movement in it. It is stable. It does not even shake or vibrate. Sanatanalti: it is everlasting and beginningless. Something noteworthy: the world is transitory, while the soul is eternal. Matter is kaleidoscopic, while the soul is stable. All things and persons etc. of the world are movable, while the soul is immovable, and all worldly objects are subject to birth and decay, while the soul is everlasting. Lord Krishna says that men identify themselves with bodies and material things, and so they do not realize that they are different from worldly things, but even then, the soul remains uniform and constant, all the time. Appendix: Sarvagata. All-pervading. The self does not mere pervade a body, but it is all-pervading. Realization of this fact is salvation, liberation from worldly bondage. As the body is seated in the world, we are not seated in the body. We, the self, have never had our union with the body. We have no union, won't have any union, and it is not possible to have a union with the body. The body is quite afar from us. But because of desire, the sense of mind and identification with the body, it appears as if we have union with the body. In fact, the Saral doesn't need the body at all. The Saral without the body also remains in bliss. This soul is unmanifest, inscrutable and immutable. Therefore, knowing it as such, you should not grieve. 25 Comment: the soul, unlike a body, is unmanifest, because it cannot be perceived by any one of the senses. Mind and intellect etc. cannot be perceived by senses, but they are thinkable. But this soul is inscrutable. The soul is immutable, i.e., it does not undergo any change while matter is changing all the time. The cause of the entire creation is matter. That causative nature, matter, is subject to change. The soul is beyond any change, as it is transcendental. In the 24th and 25th verses, Lord Krishna has described the soul by giving 8 adjectives of negation and 4 adjectives of affirmation. But the fact is that it cannot be described in words, because how can tongue illumine the soul, which is an illuminator of the tongue etc. Therefore, this realization about the soul is its real description. Thus, by knowing, realizing, the soul is uncleavable, incombustible, unmanifest, everlasting and immutable etc., one cannot grieve. Link in the next two verses, Lord Krishna says, that even if one thinks of the soul as changeable, which is against the basic principle, one should not grieve. O mighty armed, even if you suppose this soul is constantly undergoing birth and death, even then, you should not grieve over it. 26 Comment Lord Krishna, by using the terms, such as athasya and manyas means that it is a fact that the soul is unborn, Gita 2:20, yet if you accept the contrary, you should not grieve, because one who is born is bound to die, and one who dies, is bound to be reborn. None can escape this eternal rule. A seed sown in the earth, assumes different shapes, sprout, plant, tree, and then it dries up and decays. The fact is, that the seed undergoes change, every moment. If this seed had remained the same, even for a moment, how had it passed different stages up to the last one of its drying up? As a tree, it gave up its prior form at its death, and it assumes a new shape at its birth. Thus it passes, through birth and death, every moment. Similarly, this body also undergoes a change, every moment. Sperm gets mixed with ovum and the mixture grows into a baby which is born. With its birth, the process of death sets in, which culminates in death. Thus, this body undergoes a continuous change, i.e., it is born, it decays and dies. Therefore Lord Krishna says to Arjuna that even if he holds the view that the soul undergoes birth and death like a body, there is still no ground for grieving. Death is sure of him who is born, and rebirth is assured of him who is dead. You should not, therefore, grieve over the inevitable. 27 Comment According to the previous verse, if the soul is regarded as constantly taking birth and constantly dying, one should not grieve, because death is sure of him who is born, and rebirth is assured of him who is dead. This cycle of birth and death has been going on from time immemorial and will continue up to eternity. Therefore, you should not lament over the inevitable. These Dhritarashtra's sons and Bhisma, Drona etc., who are born will surely die. You cannot save them, and after death, they will certainly take rebirth. You cannot stop it. So why should you grieve? As the sun has risen, it will certainly set, and if it is set, it will definitely arise. This is an inevitable fact, which is known to all. Therefore, none grieves over the setting of the sun. It implies that one should not grieve over the death of anybody. Whatever the Lord has stated in these two verses, 26th and 27th, is not God's real theory. By the expression athasya, the Lord has put forth the argument of the people, who identify themselves with the body. This is not a correct principle. In no case Arjuna should grieve. To bring home this point to him, Lord Krishna has explained from that angle also. In these two verses, Lord Krishna says that all the worldly things, including the bodies, undergo change from one form to another. Abandoning the first form is called death, and change to the second form is called birth. One should not grieve over this cycle because it inevitably goes on. Appendix: a man is grieved if a dear one dies or there is loss of money. Similarly, we are grieved when we think about the future. If the wife dies, what will happen? If the son dies, what will happen? Etc. We are grieved and worried because we don't attach importance to discrimination. Changes in the world and in circumstances are inevitable. If circumstances don't change, how will the cycle of the world continue? How will a person pass from boyhood to youth? How will a fool become learned? How will a patient become healthy? How will a seed come into a tree? Without change, the world will become like a static thing. In fact, only a mortal dies. An immortal never dies. It is everyone's obvious experience that after death the body remains lying, but the self, the owner of the body, transmigrates. If importance is attached to this experience, there can't be any worry or grief. At the death of Bali, Lord Rama draws Tara's attention towards this experience. Manasa, Kiskindha 11:2-3, we should think over when no body remained in 84 lakh forms of life. How will this body remain intact? When 84 lakh bodies didn't remain as one and mine, how will this body remain as I and mine? This discrimination is possible only in human body, not in other bodies. Link in the next verse, Lord Krishna mentions the simple law of nature about birth and death. O Bharata, Arjuna, all beings were imperceptible before they were born and will become so again when they are dead. They are perceptible only in the intermediate stage. Why then the lamentation? 28 Comment: all the beings seen now, were not perceived before birth. These beings will also not be perceived after death. All these beings are manifest in the interim, after birth and before death. Their bodies were non-existent before birth and will remain non-existent after death. Just like in a dream. During life they seem to exist, but actually they are going into non-existence every moment. It is the principle that the thing which does not exist either before or after has no real existence in its mid-state also. Therefore, these bodies which were unmanifest in their origin and will be unmanifest in their end, are unmanifest even now, though they seem visible. But the soul existed in the past, exists now, and will also exist in future. So there is no point in lamenting for both these situations. Appendix: a thing, which does not exist at the beginning and at the end, has never any existence, while a thing, which exists at the beginning and at the end, ever exists. That which never exists, is as at unreal, body, and the entity which ever exists, is sat the reality. We have our eternal disunion with the unreal, while with the real we have our eternal union. 1. Srimad 11:24-17. The thing which exists at the beginning and at the end, also exists in the mid-state, and that is true. 2. Srimad 11:28-18. The entity which existed at the beginning of this world and which will remain in the end, and which is the root cause and illuminator of this world, the same super soul, God, also exists in the mid-state. 3. Srimad 11:28-121. The thing which didn't exist before origin and will not remain after annihilation, and doesn't exist in the middle also, it is merely an imagination, merely a name. Link: now, the Lord dwells upon the marvelous nature of the soul. One perceives the soul as a wonder, some speak of it in amazement while others hear of it in wonderment, while none knows it even after hearing of it. 29. Comment: the knowledge of the wondrous self is not achieved through the senses. The self can be known by the self itself, it is beyond the realm of senses. As I am, this knowledge requires no proof, no instrument, it is self-evident. Its consciousness cannot be experienced as separate from I. This is intuited by the person himself. This is not a subject of senses and intellect. Therefore, the knowledge of self is said to be a marvel. The term pasyati has two meanings: to see with eyes and to know the self by one's own self. Here it has been used in the sense of knowing the self by one's own self. Gita 255, 620, etc. When one sees with one's eyes, there are three things necessary: the onlooker, the object to be seen, and sight, i.e., the power to see. But while knowing the self, these three are not necessary. I am, this cannot be perceived by senses, mind and intellect, but by one's own self. When we want to search for a thing in a dark room, we need eyesight as well as light. But if there is light lamp, there is no need for another lamp to see the lamp which is lit. Similarly, there is no need for other means to perceive the self. The self has its own light by which it can be lit and known. A body is of three kinds: physical, gross, subtle, and causal. The body which is nourished by food and water for its growth, is physical, gross body. This gross body is the object of senses. The subtle body consists of 17 elements: 5 senses, 5 organs of action, 5 vital airs, mind and intellect. The subtle body can be perceived by intellect and not by senses. The latencies, vasanas, form the causal body. Reflect on the three kinds of bodies. It is evident that the gross body is not the self, as it changes every moment and it is an object of knowledge. Similar is the case with the subtle body. The causal body is an evolute of nature. But the self is beyond nature, therefore the causal body is also not the self. As far as the knowledge of the self is concerned, it is beyond them, and this knowledge is marvelous. This is askriyavat pasyati. When the soul ceases its identification with the body, it knows itself, and therefore, it has been said that one perceives the soul as a wonder. Here in this verse, as well as in the 3rd verse of the 7th chapter, Lord Krishna has used the term kasat, i.e., someone knows me in reality. It means that it is very difficult to know the imperishable, but actually it is not so. The fact is that it seems difficult only because there are a few aspirants who sincerely want to know the soul. Other persons speak of it as marvelous because it is beyond the reach of words. Speech is illumined by the self. Then, how can it describe the illuminator? The great souls who speak of it can just give a kind of hint to draw the attention of the listeners. Here, the term menya has been used to emphasize the fact that only a few liberated souls who possess metaphysical knowledge can explain it fully to an aspirant and enable him to attain the imperishable. All do not possess the ability to remove his doubts and give satisfactory answers to his arguments. Other persons hear of it as marvelous. Listening to scriptures and advice of other worlds is quite different from voice of the soul. It means that this soul is something marvelous and uncommon and is beyond the reach of senses, mind and intellect, etc. It illuminates these. Here, the term "enlightened" has been used to explain the fact that the person who hears is different from the one who knows, and from other who is capable of explaining it to an aspirant in such a manner that its full nature is revealed to him. There are some who do not know it, even on hearing. It means that merely hearing will not help one to know it. On hearing, when one gets established in one's own self, one will know one's own self by oneself. Now a question arises, that an aspirant on hearing the words of scriptures and a preceptor gets knowledge. Why has it been said then that there are some who do not know it, even on hearing of it? The answer is that it is the aspirant himself who, by having faith in the words of scriptures and preceptor, gains knowledge. Otherwise there have been several incarnations of God, and there also have been liberated souls who held discourses on metaphysics, and by hearing their discourses the people should have gained metaphysical knowledge. But actually it has not happened. Their discourses can be helpful to a striver having faith, but he will also have to get himself established in his own self. This expression does not mean to convey that knowledge of the self is impossible. It rather conveys that it is beyond the senses. However hard efforts by a man may make him to know this fact has been pointed out in the Gita several times. 2155 317 6 2015 11. Ultimately he will have to know himself by his own self. What is knowing of the self by the self? There is a difference between doing, perceiving and knowing. Doing involves organs of action, perceiving involves senses, while knowing is done by the self itself. The senses actually do not know, rather they only perceive which is useful in daily activity. This knowledge, of knowing oneself by one's own self, is of two kinds. I am different from the body and the world, and secondly, I have identity with God. In other words, it can be said, I have no affinity with the kaleidoscopic, perishable world, while I have constant affinity with unchangeable, imperishable God. After possessing this kind of knowledge, one can know the soul and reality. This knowledge is beyond the reach of speech and intellect. Appendix: the self cannot be known merely by hearing, viz., by practice, but can be known by having inquisition, by hearing from enlightened and experienced exalted souls. Gita 7:3. It means that out of the enlightened exalted souls, only someone can explain its true nature to others. All the enlightened souls can't explain it. As in the world, a couple doesn't get married merely by hearing, but the man and the woman accept each other as wife and husband, and then they are married. Similarly, no one can know God merely by hearing, but after hearing, when he accepts him himself and gets established in him, then he will know him by his own self. Therefore by hearing a man can learn the facts pertaining to knowledge, can narrate them to others, can write them, can lecture on them, can discuss them, but can't realize the self or God. One can't know God merely by hearing, but can know him by worshipping him after hearing from others. Gita 13:25. If the person, who describes the Supreme Soul, is a God-realized soul and a listener, striver, has esteemed faith and inquisition, there can be immediate self-realization. Link: the next is the concluding verse, about discrimination between the body and the soul. O Bharata, this soul residing in the bodies of all, can never be slain. Therefore, you should not grieve for any being. 30. Comment: the soul, residing in bodies of men, gods, animals, birds, insects, etc., cannot be slain, i.e., it is imperishable. The term of Dya has two meanings. I, it should not be slain. 2, it cannot be slain. For example, a cow should not be killed, because it is a deadly sin to kill a cow. But in case of the soul, it does not mean that it should not be slain, but it means that the soul cannot be slain in any way by anyone. It has also been mentioned in 2:17, that none can bring about the destruction of the indestructible substance. Therefore, you should not grieve for all beings, because the soul is indestructible, while the perishable body cannot remain the same even for a moment. Here, Sarvani Bhyatani, plural number, has been used to emphasize the fact that One should not grieve for any living being. The body is perishable, because its nature is such. It is perishing every moment. But the self is imperishable. If this reality is realized, then no grief is possible. I related and noteworthy in this section from the 11th to the 30th verses, it is explained that the soul, which is imperishable and real, is different from a body which is perishable and unreal. Unless one can discriminate between the soul and the body, one cannot follow any one of the disciplines, either of disinterested action, knowledge or devotion. Not only this, but also one who wants to go to heaven should know the distinction between the two. After the death of the body, who will go to heaven? Therefore, all the philosophers who are believers, in spite of having different opinions about philosophy, agree with the fact that the soul is different from the body. Here the Lord wants to explain this distinction clearly. This is everyone's own experience also, that a body changes from babyhood to youth and then to old age. But there is an unchangeable one that knows this change. That one is the soul. Therefore, the changeable and the unchangeable can never be identified. In this section, Lord Krishna has not used a philosophical terminology, because people think that philosophy is a subject for study only. So he has used such words as the real and the unreal, the perishable and the imperishable, etc. One who can discriminate between the two is not grieved in the least, while one who merely studies philosophy is grieved. A man may study the 6 systems of philosophy and may possess knowledge about the absolute, the soul, the nature and the world, but his knowledge is purely theoretical. On the other hand, a striver or a devotee may be concerned who wants to realize his identity with God or who wants to surrender himself to God by renouncing his assumed affinity for prakriti and the world. His knowledge is practical. There is a vast difference in these two sorts of knowledge. Appendix: the Lord has described the discrimination between the Dea, body, and the possessor of the body, from the 11th to the 30th verses. While describing this topic, Lord Krishna has not used a philosophical terminology such as Brahmajiva, Prakriti Purusa, Jatasatana, Mayavjna, Atma and Atma, etc. The reason is that the Lord, instead of making it a subject for study, wants to make it a subject of everyone's experience and wants to prove that every man can discriminate the body from the self. It needs no study, no eligibility. If a man applies the discrimination between the real and the unreal on his body, he is a striver, seeker, and if he applies it on the world, he is learned. By keeping himself aloof, if a person discriminates between the real and the unreal, he may become learned by possessing bookish knowledge, not learning, but he can attain self-realization. But he who discriminates between the real and the unreal in his own body, can attain self-realization. It means that discrimination between the real and the unreal in the world is for pedantry, while the Gita is not for pedantry. Therefore Earth Lord, instead of using the philosophical terminology, has used simple words such as Dhyadi, Sarira Sariri, viz., the body and its possessor. Those who discriminate between the real and the unreal in the world, they keeping themselves aloof, make themselves the authority on the knowledge of the Gita. But any person who discriminates the body from the self in him, is eligible for self-realization. For self-realization, the discussion on discrimination between the body and the self is useful, and in order to gain learning, the discussion on tattva, the divinity, is useful. Therefore the striver who wants to realize the self, first of all should discriminate his own self from the body, that the body has no connection with the self and the self has no connection with the body, viz., I am not body. He who has assumed the existence and greatness, value, of the body with as much truth, firmness, belief and doubtlessness, should assume, accept, the existence and value of the self, soul, with the same truth, firmness, belief and doubtlessness, and should realize the self. The body is the means only for performing an action, and an action is performed only for the world. As a writer uses a pen only for writing, and when he stops writing, he puts the pen at its proper place. Similarly, a striver should use the body while doing an action and should leave the body in its original position when the work is finished, as he should be detached from it. The reason is that if we do nothing, what is the need of the body? An important fact for a striver is to renounce the known unreal. If a striver renounces what he knows as unreal, his spiritual discipline will become natural and easy, and his aim will be attained. The lovability of a striver for the end, aim, is called his spiritual discipline. That lovability is not acquired by anything, person, power etc., or by practice, but that is acquired by having the sense of mind for the end, Lord. The person in whom a striver has the sense of mind, naturally becomes lovable, dear, to him. But the real sense of mind is with that object, or person, in which, or in whom, there are the following four traits: 1. With whom we have identity, oneness, of the self. 2. With whom our relationship is eternal. 3. From whom we never want anything. 4. To whom we may surrender all what we have. These four conditions are applicable only in God. The reason is that our relationship with the body and the world is not eternal, and the category of the self is quite different from that of the world and body. How can there be identity of the kaleidoscopic world with the never-changing self? The identity of the self with the body, which is perceived, is not real but is assumed. This assumed identity is only to perform duty. It means that we can serve the person with whom we have assumed our identity, but we can't have the sense of mind with him. In order to renounce the known unreal, it is necessary that a striver should renounce the relationship which our discrimination does not support. Assuming a person, with whom we have neither eternal relationship nor identity of the self, our own and for us, is anti-discrimination relationship. So long as there is anti-discrimination relationship, no spiritual discipline will lead to self-realization. By having affinity with the body, a person may undergo austere penance, may have trance, may go round the world. His delusion can't be destroyed and the supreme truth can't be attained. Having renounced the anti-discrimination relationship, delusion is destroyed and the supreme truth is realized. Therefore a striver shouldn't be at ease without renouncing the anti-discrimination relationship. If we don't renounce our assumed anti-discrimination relationship with the body will leave us certainly. Then what is the difficulty in renouncing our kinship with the body? Therefore a seeker may follow any discipline. He will have to accept the truth: I am not body and the body is not mine and it is not for me, because I am a sariri, self, and the self is unmanifest. So long as a striver has the kinship of I and mineness with the body, there is no realization of the supreme truth and he remains bound by virtuous actions, useful reflection and attachment to trance. He may perform virtuous actions such as performance of sacrifice, undergoing penances, offering charity, may reflect upon the soul or the supreme soul or be established in trance. He is not totally free from bondage. The reason is that assumption of the kinship of the self with the body is the root of bondage and also of the flaw which causes all flaws. If the assumed affinity of a striver with the body is totally wiped out, sinful actions will not at all be performed by him and he will not be attached to virtuous actions. There will not be any meaningless reflection by him at all, and he will not be attached to meaningful reflection. He will not be fickle in the least and will neither be attached to trance, constancy or absence of all thoughts. Thus at the destruction of attachment of the gross, physical, body to actions, of the subtle body to reflection and of causal body to constancy, his aim will be attained, viz., his delusion will be destroyed and the supreme truth will be realized. Therefore Earth Lord at the outset of his gospel has described the discrimination between the body and the self in order to wipe out a striver's, self's, relationship with the body. Arjuna was grieved, by apprehending the death of his kinsmen and preceptors. Moreover he was afraid that sin would accrue to him, by killing them, and that sin would lead him to hell. Therefore Lord Krishna preached this gospel in the 11th to the 30th verses. Now, he starts the worldly standpoint and reminds Arjuna of his duty, as a member of the warrior class. Looking at your own duty as well, you should not falter, for there is nothing more meritorious to a person of the warrior class, kshatriya, than a righteous war. 31 Comment in the first two verses, he describes the benefit of war. Man, soul, is a fragment of God. But by identifying himself with the body, noting himself as a brahmana, of the priest class, or a kshatriya, of the warrior class, etc., he has to discharge his duty as a member of that class. Similarly, one who acknowledging himself as a teacher or a father, has to discharge the duty of a teacher or a father. Here, the duty of a kshatriya has been called dharma, righteousness. It is the foremost duty of a kshatriya. Not to in the 18th chapter, 1842-48, the Lord has described the innate flee from war front. For a kshatriya, righteousness is upheld by waging war. So, Lord Krishna asks Arjuna to discharge his duty, by waging war. He should never shirk that duty. There is nothing more welcome to a man of the warrior class than a righteous war of his, which is his main duty. Gita 1843. Similar is the case with the people of other classes, the priest, the business and the labor classes. Arjuna, in the 7th verse of the 2nd chapter, requested Lord Krishna to tell him what is good for him. In response to his request, Lord Krishna tells him that he would attain salvation by performing his duty of waging a righteous war. So, he should not retreat from it. Appendix. Having described the discrimination between Daya, body, and a self, the Lord from this verse to the 38th verse describes the performance of one's duty. The reason is that the supreme truth which is realized by the discrimination between Daya and Day, the same supreme truth can be realized by the proper use of the body, by performing one's duty. In discrimination knowing is important, and in performance of one's duty doing is important. Though discrimination is important for a man, as it is useful for him in practical and spiritual life and also in this world as well as the other world, yet the Lord mentions performance of one's duty for the person who doesn't understand the discrimination between the body and the self, so that instead of becoming a scholar by possessing bookish knowledge or rote learning, he may realize the truth. It means that a person who wants to know Godhead but without having a keen intellect and a keen self-denial, detachment, couldn't know him by the discipline of duties of the people of our castes. There the term Dharma, 1847, stands for one's duty. Thus the terms karma and dharma are synonymous. Knowledge, he can know the Supreme Soul by the discipline of action. Gita 5:4-5. Arjuna was a Kshatriya, member of the warrior class. Therefore the Lord has mentioned the duty of a Kshatriya. In fact here the duty of a Kshatriya is the denotation for the duties of the 4 Varnas. Therefore it means that the members of other Varnas, castes, such as Brahmana, member of the priest class, etc., should also discharge their duties. Gita 1842-44. Svadharma, one's own duty, has been mentioned as Svavajakarma, Sahajakarma and Svakarma, etc. Gita 1842-48. Discharge of one's duty for the welfare of others, by renouncing selfishness, pride and the desire for fruit, is performing Svadharma. Discharge of Svadharma, one's duty, is Karmaga, the discipline of action. Fortunate are the Kshatriyas, 0 Partha, who get such an unsolicited opportunity for war, which utters an open gateway to heaven. 32. Comment. Duryodhana imposed a condition on the Pandavas: if you lose while gambling, you will be exiled for 12 years and will reside in an unknown place for 1 year. Then after 13 years you will regain your empire. But, if you are identified during the 1-year period, you will again be exiled for 12 years. The Pandavas accepted the condition and suffered 12 years in exile, and 1 year's incognito existence. After expiration of the period, when the Pandavas demanded their empire, Duryodhana refused to give them even as much land as could be covered by the point of a needle, without waging war. The Pandavas made several efforts for a compromise, but Duryodhana bluntly refused. Therefore, Lord Krishna says to Arjuna, you have got this unsought and unsolicited opportunity for waging a war. Such a righteous war is an open gateway to heaven. Those Kshatriyas who get such an opportunity are really lucky. He means to say that the happiness which is derived by discharging one's duty is far superior to worldly pleasures which could be enjoyed, even by animals and birds. Link. In the next 4 verses, Lord Krishna explains the evil consequences of not waging a war. If you do not wage such a righteous war, then in abandoning your duty and forfeiting your honor, you shall incur sin. 33. Comment. Even if you do not want to discharge your duty, by waging war, bound by your own action born of your nature, you will have to engage in it against your will. 1860. If you do not wage war, you will neglect your duty and you will not only lose your reputation, but incur sin also. Moreover, by abandoning your duty, you will have to accept the duty of others, and so you will incur sin, and by abandoning war, you will be regarded as an unmanly warrior, and thus you will lose your honor and reputation. All beings will ever recount your undying infamy, and that is surely worse than death for a man enjoying popular esteem. 34. Comment. Men, gods, genies, and demons etc., and all, who do not have even the least friendship or enmity with you, Such simple beings will recount your infamy and dishonor and will call you a coward, if you do not wage war. They will disparage your chivalry, and will say that you proved to be a coward, which could not even be imagined. By using the word te, thy, Lord Krishna means to say, that Arjuna, who is renowned in heaven, in this world, as well as in the infernal world, for his courage, will be called a coward. By using the term avyam, everlasting, he means that as he is famous for his excellence and bravery, he will be unpopular for his weakness and timidity forever. In the first half of this verse, the Lord discussed Arjuna's disparagement by common people. Now he is talking in general terms. In the world, if any man, who is regarded superior to others and enjoys popular esteem, loses his honor and fame, his infamy is more painful to him, than even death. Because in natural death he does not lose his name and fame, while he loses these by shunning his duty. In case of natural death, no crime or sin is committed, but shirking duty is a sin, which brings much discredit. The great chariot warriors, who held you in high esteem, will consider you as lowly, thinking that you have desisted from war, out of fear. 35 Comment: if you think that you have desisted from war, in order to attain salvation by avoiding sin, it is not true. If you had thought of it as a sin to wage the war, you might have spent some time in devotion and meditation in solitude, and would not have invited me to wage this war. Therefore, if you desist from the war, all the living beings will think that you have done so out of fear, not out of a sense of duty and righteousness, as it is the first and foremost duty of a kshatriya to fight. Yc8 Vambahumato be it Vyasius Elagavam. The great chariot warriors such as Bhisma, Drona, Kripa and Salya etc., who hold you in high esteem for your mighty valor, because you have defeated several demons, gods and demigods etc., you will fall in their esteem as one who has fled from the war front out of fear of death. Your enemies, disparaging your strength, will speak in unbecoming terms. What could be more distressing than this? 36 Comment: your sworn enemies, such as Duryodhana, Dusasena and Kama etc., in spite of knowing your deeds of valor, will belittle your strength and will laugh at you and call you a coward and impotent. How will you bear those insolent jokes and irreparable ignominy? What can be more painful than this? It is generally seen that a person of respectable and high standing cannot tolerate insults from persons of low standing, and he performs deeds of mighty valor, beyond expectation. Similarly, you will not be able to tolerate ignominy and slander, and so there will be no alternative for you but to wage the war that has been declared. So, how could you bear that ignominy? Link: after explaining the adverse consequences of not waging the war, in the preceding 4 verses, in the next 2 verses Lord Krishna explains the favorable consequences of war. Slain in battle you will gain heaven, victorious you will enjoy the sovereignty of earth. Therefore, arise, Zero son of Kunti, determined to fight. 37 Comment: the 6th verse of this chapter, Arjuna raised the question that they did not know whether they would conquer the sons of Dhritarashtra or Dhritarashtra's sons would conquer them. So Lord Krishna answers the question and says, if you are killed by Kama etc., you will attain heaven, and if you gain victory, you will gain the kingdom. Thus righteous warfare would result in good, both here and hereafter. So you should be prepared to wage war, otherwise you risk to lose both. Krishna, by addressing Arjuna as Kaudya, wants to remind him of the message to wage the war, sent by his mother when he went to the Kauravas, with a proposal for a treaty. Therefore, he should rise to the occasion with full determination. Arjuna was determined not to fight, and Lord Krishna, in the 3rd verse of this chapter, ordered him to rise to the occasion. Here, Arjuna is in a dilemma, whether to wage war or not. So Lord Krishna exhorts him to be determined to fight, without having any doubts. Here, Lord Krishna wants to say that everyone should discharge his duty very sincerely and enthusiastically, to the best of his power and ability, in whatever circumstances he is placed. Humanity demands it. Upon success by discharging one's duty, one makes advancement in this world and other world. It means that by discharging one's duty and by abstaining from what ought not to be done, one attains perfection here as well as hereafter. Treating alike victory and defeat, gain and loss, pleasure and pain, and engage yourself in battle. Fighting thus you will incur no sin. 38 Comment: Arjuna was thinking that by killing his kinsman he would incur sin. So Lord Krishna clarifies that it is not the war but desire, which induces a man to incur sin. So by renouncing desire, he should be engaged in war. In a war a man either gains victory or suffers defeat. Victory results in gain, while defeat results in loss. Worldly people view gain with pleasure and loss with pain. But your aim is not to think of victory and defeat, gain and loss, and pleasure and pain, but your goal is to discharge your duty by treating the agreeable and the disagreeable alike. By doing so you will incur no sin, viz. You will be free from bondage. Everyone should discharge his duty earnestly and efficiently, whether he has a desire or not for its fruit. By refusing to be affected by favorable and unfavorable circumstances, the mind becomes steady. So treating the two equally, one should discharge one's duty. Moreover, one should not perform an action for the sake of pleasure, and refrain from another, for fear of its pain. Scriptures should be the authority in determining what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. Gita 16:24. Here, the word, sin, has been used both for sin and virtue. The former leads to the bondage of hell and the latter to the constraints of heaven. Both of these deprive a man of salvation and binds him to follow the cycle of birth and death. So, Lord Krishna exhorts Arjuna to discharge his duty of waging war, by being even-minded. This will help him to escape the bondage of both sin and virtue. Something noteworthy regarding this section: in this section of 8 verses from the 31st to the 30th verse 8, Lord Krishna has disclosed several variegated feelings. While delivering a discourse or explaining a subject, the beginning should deal with positive aspects, the middle with negative aspects, and the conclusion should again deal with positive aspects. In this context also, Lord Krishna in the 31st and 32nd verses explains the favorable consequences of discharging one's duty. In the middle from the 33rd to the 36th verses, he explains the adverse consequences of not performing one's duty and again concludes, in the 37th and 38th verses, by explaining the favorable consequences of discharging the duty and orders Arjuna to act accordingly. 2. In these verses, Lord Krishna has also clarified the doubts arising in the mind of Arjuna. For example, Arjuna says, I don't foresee any good ensuing from the slaughter of kinsmen. 131. Lord Krishna replies in 231, there is nothing more welcome to a man of the warrior class than a righteous war. In 137 Arjuna says, how can we, by killing our kinsmen, be happy? Lord Krishna replies in 232, happy are the kshatriyas who get the opportunity of waging such an unsolicited warfare. In 144 Arjuna says, the consequence of the war will lead to hell. In 232-37 Lord Krishna says, the war is an open gateway to heaven. In 136 Arjuna says, sin alone will accrue to us by waging the war and by slaying them. Lord Krishna replies in 233, if you do not wage such a righteous war and abandon your duty, you will incur sin. In 140 Arjuna says, the result of the war will be that impiety will take hold of the entire family. Lord Krishna in 233 says, if you do not wage such a righteous war, you will abandon your duty, viz. Righteousness. 3. In 2.5 Arjuna insists and says, it is better to live on alms than to wage war. Therefore, Lord Krishna in 238 orders him to wage war. Uddhava had a desire to live with Lord Krishna. So Lord Krishna directed him to go to the northern mountains and do penance there. Srimad Bhagavata 11:29-41. It means that desire of any type is an obstacle to salvation. 4. In these verses Lord Krishna has explained in detail some of the things which were referred to in brief in the 2nd and 3rd verses of this chapter. For example, earlier the expression anriya justum, it is shunned by noble souls, was used. Here the expression, any other thing more welcome than a righteous war, has been used. There the term, not leading to heaven, was used. Here the expression, an open gateway to heaven, has been used. There the term akirtakram, not bringing fame, was used. Here the expression akirtam kapi beatani kath is tevyam, all creatures will even recount your undying infamy, has been used. There, Lord Krishna ordered Arjuna to fight by using the expression tyact vadista parantapa. Here also, he orders him to fight by using the expression tato yudhya yudhyasva. Appendix: the Gita teaches the remarkable art of spiritual upliftment through one's own dealings, so that a person, under all circumstances, having all kinds of dealings sanctioned by the scriptures, may attain salvation. Generally other scriptures mention that if you want to attain salvation, become a recluse by renouncing mundane materials and live in solitude, because the mundane affairs and spiritual upliftment can't go together. But the Gita declares that at whatever place you are, whatever sect you follow, whatever principle you live up to, whatever religion, school of thought, varna, caste, asrama, stage of life, you follow, by following them, if you act according to the gospel of the Gita, it will lead you to salvation. The supreme truth, which recluses and saints attained in solitude by practicing spiritual discipline for years together, will be attained in practical worldly life by following the teachings of the Gita, by becoming even-minded. And success and failure, performance of one's duty without the desire for fruit, is to act according to the gospel of the Gita. What can be more terrible circumstance and activity, action, than a war? When a man can attain salvation under such a terrible circumstance and activity as a war, then what other more terrible circumstance and activity will be there in which he may not attain salvation? According to the Gita, sitting on a seat in loneliness and meditating on God can lead to salvation, Gita 6:10-13, and waging a war can also lead to salvation. Arjuna wanted neither heaven nor kingdom, Jira 132:35-8. He wanted to turn away from the sin which would accrue by killing his kith and kin, Gita 136:39-45. Therefore the Lord appears to say, if you don't covet heaven and kingdom and want to turn away from the sin, discharge your duty of fighting in the war, treating the agreeable and the disagreeable alike. Thus you will incur no sin vipapamavapsyasi. The reason is that sin is not incurred by waging war, but uneven-mindedness, partiality, desire, selfishness and ego are the causes of sin. It is your duty, dharma, to wage war. Sin is incurred by not performing one's duty and by doing which should not be done. In the preceding verse the Lord seemed to say to Arjuna, if you want to gain kingdom and heaven, it is proper for you to perform your duty, while in this verse he seems to say, if you don't want to gain kingdom and heaven, it is proper for you to discharge your duty by being even-minded. It means that it is improper not to discharge one's duty under any circumstances. The Lord, in the next two verses, authorizes Arjuna to be guided by even-mindedness, already mentioned in the preceding verse, and he describes its glory.